There comes a stage in your journey where silence becomes louder than applause, where being alone feels safer than being surrounded, and where walking away becomes the most spiritual decision you ever make. Buddhism teaches that the moment you stop fearing solitude, you unlock a strength that most people never touch. Because when you finally sit with yourself without distractions, without noise, without the wrong people, you begin to realize a truth that changes everything. Your peace was never missing. It was simply buried under everyone you were trying to hold on to. And once you taste the power of being alone, once you feel how calm, clear, and steady your soul becomes, you no longer chase anyone, you no longer need anyone, and no one, not rejection, not betrayal, not loss, can break you again. 1. You stop depending on others for emotional survival. Most people live their lives surrounded by constant noise, endless conversations, constant social media scrolling, group hangouts, and people they don't even connect with on a deep level. They do all of this not because they truly want to, but because they are terrified of what will happen when everything becomes quiet. When the room becomes silent, when there's no one left to entertain them or distract them, they are forced to face their own mind. And for many, their own mind is the scariest place in the world. So they keep running into crowds, into friendships, into relationships, hoping that someone else's presence will drown out the discomfort they feel inside. But this is not connection. This is survival. It is a desperate attempt to escape themselves. People crave company not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of emptiness, fear of silence, fear of confronting their own truth, fear of realizing how much inner work they have avoided. This kind of emotional dependence becomes a silent prison. You start relying on others to make you feel valued, worthy, loved, or even simply distracted. You teach your mind that happiness exists outside you, not inside you. And the moment you do that, you give others power over your emotional state. Their presence becomes your comfort, their absence becomes your suffering. But something transformative happens the day you choose to walk alone. The moment you sit with your own thoughts without trying to escape them, a new kind of strength begins to rise. You realize you can calm yourself without needing someone to reassure you. You can comfort yourself without needing someone to hold you. You can validate yourself without waiting for someone to approve of your choices. Slowly, you stop expecting others to fix your wounds or fill your emptiness. You stop chasing attention. You stop clinging to anyone who gives you a moment of affection. You begin to understand that everything you were searching for in the world, peace, clarity, stability, was something you were meant to build within yourself. Buddhism teaches that the root of suffering is attachment, especially the attachment to needing others to make us feel complete. When you detach from the need to be emotionally carried by others, the world immediately loses its power to hurt you. You no longer panic when someone pulls away. You no longer break down when someone changes. You no longer feel lost when the room becomes empty. You start living with a quiet confidence, knowing that your emotional survival no longer depends on who stays or who leaves. And this is where real strength begins, when you become the source of your own peace. Solitude slowly transforms into a teacher, guiding you toward a stronger version of yourself. It becomes a healer, helping you mend old wounds you used to hide behind other people. It becomes a form of liberation, freeing you from the emotional chains that once kept you tied to others. When you reach that stage, people may still disappoint you, but they will never destroy you again. Their behavior may hurt, but it will never break your foundation. Their absence may be noticed, but it will never collapse your world. Because you finally understand that the most powerful form of emotional survival comes from within, not from the people around you, not from the distractions you use, but from the inner stability you build in silence. 2. Alone time teaches you what you truly value. When you spend your life constantly surrounded by people, family, friends, co-workers, even strangers online, You slowly begin to absorb their thoughts, their tastes, their wishes, and their fears without even realizing it. Humans are naturally influenced by their environment, and when the environment is full of voices, opinions, and expectations, your own inner voice becomes buried under the noise. You start choosing things not because they feel right to you, but because they are what everyone else seems to be chasing. You follow trends you don't care about. You accept beliefs you haven't tested. You pursue goals that don't align with your spirit. You even stay in relationships that drain you simply because everyone around you says you should. Over time, you forget what you actually value. But everything begins to change the moment you spend time alone, truly alone, without distractions, without social pressure, without trying to fit into anyone's mold. Solitude removes the outside voices so you can finally hear your own truth. The mind, when surrounded by silence, begins to reveal what it has been hiding behind noise. You start noticing what genuinely brings you peace, what makes you anxious, what inspires you, what drains your spirit, what aligns with your deepest self, and what pulls you away from it. In solitude, you discover whether you enjoy something because your soul resonates with it, or because the world convinced you to enjoy it. Buddhism teaches that clarity comes from stillness. When the water of the mind is shaken by constant activity, constant people, constant noise, everything inside becomes blurry. But when you allow the water to settle, when you sit alone without forcing anything, the truth rises naturally. You begin to understand what truly matters to you, not what society has told you should matter. You start noticing the difference between peace and excitement, between temporary pleasure and long-term purpose, between superficial fun and deep fulfillment. You realize that some friendships were built on convenience, not connection. Some dreams were built on pressure, not passion. Some habits were built on fear, not freedom. Solitude removes the illusion and leaves nothing but the raw truth. And even though the truth can be uncomfortable at first, it is the doorway to self-awareness. One of the most powerful transformations that happens when you embrace aloneness is that your priorities rearrange themselves naturally. You no longer chase things because everyone else is chasing them. You no longer copy the desires of others. You stop living on autopilot. You choose intentionally. You discover what kind of life your heart has been trying to lead you toward, but couldn't speak over the noise of the world. And once you know your true values, everything changes. You stop wasting time on meaningless relationships. You stop pouring energy into distractions. You stop accepting situations that feel wrong. You become difficult to manipulate because no one can convince you to go against what you now clearly understand about yourself. You know what your soul needs, and you protect it. This is why the strongest souls choose solitude. They know that alone time isn't loneliness, it's clarity. It's a sacred pause where your real values reveal themselves. It's where you remember who you are when no one is trying to shape you. And when you build your life around your true values, instead of the values of others, you live with a grounded confidence that no one can shake. 3. Walking alone strengthens your inner stability. Most people don't realize how fragile their emotional stability is until life removes someone they depended on. A friend stops calling, a partner stops caring, a family member becomes distant. Suddenly, their whole world collapses. Not because the event was catastrophic, but because their emotional foundation was built on someone else's presence. When another person becomes the source of your courage, your happiness, your confidence, or your peace, their absence feels like an earthquake that shakes your entire identity. This is why so many people fall apart. When relationships end or when support disappears, they never built a stable inner home. They only borrowed someone else's. But when you walk alone, everything changes. Solitude forces you to build a strength that cannot be borrowed, replaced, or taken away. When you rely on your own mind to calm your storms, You develop emotional muscles that people who avoid solitude will never understand. You learn to face your fears without needing someone to hold your hand. You learn to comfort your pain without needing someone to cheer you up. You learn that your mind can break, rebuild, and rise again, even in silence. The more time you spend being your own support, the more stable you become. Buddhism teaches that real stability doesn't come from controlling your surroundings, it comes from mastering your inner reactions. This mastery is impossible to develop in a world full of noise, distractions, and constant emotional outsourcing. But when you walk alone, you finally get the space to observe your thoughts, discover the patterns that make you anxious, understand the emotions that overwhelm you, and learn how to respond to life without panicking. You begin to notice the difference between what you feel and what you are. This awareness becomes your anchor. Walking alone also protects you from emotional dependency. When you're constantly surrounded by others, it's easy to lean on them for strength, motivation, and emotional safety. But dependence creates weakness. It teaches your mind that it cannot handle life by itself. It convinces you that your stability comes from outside, not inside. So the moment someone pulls away, you fall. But solitude reverses this slowly and quietly. When you walk alone long enough, you begin to realize that you don't break as easily as you thought. You can handle disappointment without drowning. You can handle fear without running. You can handle loneliness without losing yourself. This inner stability becomes one of the most powerful things you will ever develop. It's the kind of strength no one can see but everyone can feel. You move differently. You react differently. You no longer explode emotionally when things go wrong. You no longer collapse when someone disrespects you. You no longer chase people who leave. You no longer fear silence. You learn to stand firm, not because life got easier, but because you became stronger from within. And the most liberating part? Once you build your inner stability, relationships stop feeling like lifelines and start feeling like choices. You don't hold people tightly out of fear. You don't attach yourself to unhealthy dynamics. You don't tolerate disrespect or instability. Why? Because your life doesn't collapse without anyone. Your foundation is internal, not external. The world can shake around you, but you stay centered. This is why the strongest souls walk alone. They've built a stability that doesn't depend on applause, approval, company, or validation. They don't fear losing people because their strength isn't borrowed from them. They don't fear being alone because solitude trained them to trust themselves. When you reach this level of inner strength, life becomes less chaotic, relationships become healthier, and your sense of self becomes unbreakable. And this is the quiet power of solitude. It turns your mind into a fortress, your heart into a steady flame, and your spirit into something that cannot be shaken no matter who stays, who leaves, or what the world throws at you. 4. Aloneness sharpens your intuition and inner guidance. Most people walk through life listening to everyone except themselves. They listen to society telling them what success looks like. They listen to friends telling them what decisions to make. They listen to family telling them who they should become. They listen to strangers online, trends on social media, and opinions from people who don't even know them. With so many voices pulling at their mind, their inner guidance becomes silent. Their intuition, the quiet inner compass that always knows the right direction, gets buried under a mountain of noise. And this is why so many people feel lost, confused, or unsure about their path. They have forgotten how to listen to their own soul. But when you begin to walk alone, something powerful starts to awaken inside you. Solitude removes the outside voices one by one, until the only voice remaining is your own. In that silence, your intuition, something you might not have heard in years, comes back to life. You start noticing things you ignored before. You sense when something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why. You feel when someone's intentions are not genuine, You recognize red flags that you used to overlook because you were blinded by attachment or influenced by others' opinions. Walking alone reconnects you with the part of yourself that has always known the truth, even when your mind didn't want to accept it. Buddhism teaches that wisdom doesn't come from noise, it comes from inner stillness. The mind, when quiet, becomes like a clear lake where you can finally see what lies beneath. In solitude, you're no longer rushing from one distraction to another. You're not trying to impress anyone, prove anything, or fit into any mold. The stillness gives your intuition the space to speak without being interrupted. You begin to understand that your heart has been whispering guidance all your life, but you were surrounded by too much noise to hear it. As you walk alone more often, your intuition grows sharper. It becomes a trusted companion. You start making decisions not out of fear, not out of pressure, not out of habit, but out of alignment. You begin to feel the difference between the path that drains your spirit and the path that nourishes it. You notice how your body reacts around certain people: tension, heaviness, uneasiness. You notice how your mind reacts to certain choices: peace, clarity, expansion. You no longer force yourself into situations that don't feel right deep down, because solitude has taught you to trust that inner feeling. Walking alone also frees you from the influence of others' emotional energy. When you are constantly surrounded by people, you unknowingly absorb their fears, insecurities, anger, jealousy, and expectations. These energies cloud your intuition, making it hard to distinguish your emotions from theirs. But in solitude, you learn which feelings genuinely belong to you. You learn what your spirit responds to naturally. And this separation clears your inner space, so you can hear your intuition without interference. Your intuition also begins to protect you. It warns you when a person has bad intentions before anything happens. It tells you when a situation is unsafe. It quietly signals when someone is lying or pretending. It nudges you away from environments that don't align with your growth. When you were surrounded by noise, these warnings were easy to ignore. But once you walk alone and learn to trust your inner voice, these signals feel louder, clearer, and impossible to dismiss. This inner guidance becomes a form of spiritual armor. It prevents you from repeating old mistakes. It helps you choose people who bring peace instead of chaos. It teaches you to listen to the energy someone carries, rather than the words they speak. It encourages you to let go of situations that harm your soul, even when your mind tries to hold on. You stop settling for what doesn't resonate. You stop chasing what feels forced. You stop ignoring the truth simply because others don't see it. One of the greatest gifts of solitude is this: you finally learn that you were never confused, you were simply distracted. You were never lost, you were simply surrounded. You were never weak, you were simply disconnected from your own wisdom. Everything you have been searching for: clarity, direction, purpose, was always within you, waiting for a moment of silence to be heard. This is why strong souls walk alone. Not because they dislike people, but because they trust themselves more than they trust the noise of the world. They understand that intuition is their most powerful guide, and solitude is the only place where intuition grows. They have learned that the truth is not found in crowds, in opinions, or in external validation. It is found in the quiet moments when the heart speaks and the world goes silent. And once you develop this inner guidance, no one can mislead you. No one can confuse your path. No one can manipulate your decisions. You walk through life with a sense of knowing, a calm certainty that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. That is what makes you powerful. That is what makes you unshakable. And that is why the strongest souls always walk alone. 5. Solitude heals you from old wounds you never faced. Most people carry wounds they never talk about. Pain from childhood, betrayal from relationships, disappointments from dreams that collapsed, words that hurt them years ago but still echo in their minds, rejection that damaged their self-worth, moments where they felt unseen, unprotected, or unloved. These wounds don't disappear just because time passes. They stay buried inside, shaping the way you think, the way you love, the way you trust, and the way you react to life. But because the world is fast and loud, most people never slow down long enough to face what's hurting them. Instead, they distract themselves with people, noise, entertainment, and activity, anything to avoid confronting the pain that rises in silence. But here's the truth. Silence doesn't create pain, it reveals it. And that is exactly why solitude is so powerful. When you walk alone, when you allow yourself to sit in stillness without anyone to distract you, all the emotions you've been avoiding finally come to the surface. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You start feeling sadness you ignored, anger you suppressed, guilt you never processed, or grief you never allowed yourself to feel. Many people run away at this stage, thinking the discomfort means something is wrong. But Buddhism teaches that when deep pain rises to the surface during solitude, it is not punishment, it is purification. Solitude becomes the mirror that shows you the wounds you've been carrying. It shows you the patterns you repeat because of these wounds. It reveals why you cling to certain people, why you fear abandonment, why you get triggered easily, why you choose relationships that resemble your past, or why you avoid vulnerability. You begin to understand your own emotional blueprint. You start seeing how every unhealed part of you has been influencing your life more than you ever realized. And once awareness comes, healing begins. Being alone gives you the space to sit with your pain without numbing it. You can finally ask yourself the questions you avoided for years. Why did that hurt me so deeply? Why do I keep choosing people who don't choose me? Why do I feel empty when I'm alone? Why did I allow certain behaviors? Why do I fear being replaced or abandoned? These questions are not signs of weakness, they are signs of awakening. This is the first time you allow your soul to speak honestly. Pain begins to unravel. Your heart begins to breathe again. You start forgiving not because others deserve forgiveness, but because your soul deserves peace. You release grudges because you realize they poison your spirit more than they punish the person who hurt you. You stop replaying old memories because you understand they only keep your wounds open. In solitude, you finally give yourself permission to let go of the past, not because it didn't matter, but because you matter more. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues not because of the pain itself, but because of the resistance to feeling it. When you walk alone, you stop resisting. You allow yourself to feel, and by feeling, you release. Solitude becomes a safe container where your heart can express the emotions it was never allowed to express. You learn to sit with your sadness without judging it. You learn to breathe through your anxiety instead of fighting it. You learn to observe your emotional waves without drowning in them. Slowly, something beautiful happens. The wounds that once controlled your life begin to lose their power. The memories that once triggered tears begin to soften. The fear that once paralyzed you begins to loosen its grip. You realize you are healing not because anyone saved you, but because you finally faced what needed to be faced. This kind of healing cannot happen in crowded rooms. It cannot happen when you are constantly surrounded by people who distract you from yourself. It cannot happen when you keep running from silence. Healing requires space. It requires stillness. It requires the gentle truth that only solitude can bring. And once you heal those deep wounds, your entire life changes. You stop attracting people who mirror your pain. You stop accepting love that hurts your spirit. You stop repeating the same emotional cycles. You stop being triggered by old patterns. You begin to love yourself with a sincerity you never felt before. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to see life with clarity instead of fear. Solitude transforms your wounds into wisdom. It turns your pain into strength. It turns your story into growth. By walking alone, you become the healer you always needed. You finally realize that what broke you in the past no longer has the power to break you again. Because healing did not come from time or from people, it came from the courage to sit alone and face your truth with an open heart. This is why the strongest souls embrace solitude, because they know healing doesn't happen outside, it happens within. And once you heal within, you become someone no past, no person, and no experience can ever control again. 6. Being alone helps you set boundaries without guilt. Most people struggle with boundaries not because they don't know what they need, but because they fear the consequences of honoring those needs. They worry that saying no will disappoint others. They fear that walking away will make them look selfish. They believe that protecting their peace will push people away. As a result, they stay in conversations that drain them, friendships that suffocate them, relationships that diminish them, and environments that disturb their inner balance. They silence their own discomfort just to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. They tolerate disrespect because they fear loneliness. They shrink themselves to be accepted, and without realizing it, every time they do this, they abandon themselves a little more. But solitude changes everything. When you learn to be alone without fear, a powerful shift happens inside you. You stop craving approval because you finally validate yourself. You stop chasing acceptance because you accept yourself. You stop depending on others for emotional safety because you become your own safe space. Suddenly, saying no doesn't feel dangerous anymore, it feels natural. Setting boundaries no longer feels like losing someone, it feels like saving yourself. You realize that anyone who leaves because you protected your peace was never meant to stay, and instead of feeling guilty for choosing yourself, you feel proud. When you spend time alone, you become deeply familiar with your own energy. You notice how peaceful solitude feels compared to the chaos certain people bring. You begin to recognize which interactions drain you, which conversations feel forced, which relationships feel unbalanced, and which people disrupt your inner stillness. Solitude teaches you to differentiate between genuine connection and emotional noise. And once you learn that difference, you naturally start protecting the peace you worked so hard to build. Buddhism teaches that your inner world must be guarded the same way you would protect a temple. You don't let anyone walk in with muddy feet. You don't allow chaos where you're cultivating calm. You don't tolerate disrespect where you're nurturing compassion. You understand that peace is not something you find, it's something you protect. And boundaries are the walls that protect that peace. Before solitude, you might have allowed people to cross your limits because you feared being alone. But after solitude, being alone becomes a source of strength, not a threat. You no longer put yourself in situations where you have to betray your own heart just to keep someone close. You no longer accept apologies that come with repeated disrespect. You no longer allow people to use you, manipulate you, or drain you. You begin to choose people who respect your time, honor your presence, and value your energy. And you walk away from anyone who doesn't. When you enjoy your own company, your standards naturally rise. You stop settling for the bare minimum because you know what peace feels like. You refuse to go back to environments where you had to fight to be understood or appreciated. You no longer feel obligated to give unlimited access to people who proved they don't deserve it. You learn to detach without bitterness and protect without fear. Your boundaries become firm, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. This is the transformation solitude creates. You stop explaining why you're protecting your peace because you realize your peace doesn't need permission. You stop apologizing for distancing yourself because emotional safety is not selfish, it is survival. You stop giving multiple chances to the same behavior because you finally value your time and energy. The guilt that once held you hostage slowly fades, replaced with a calm certainty that you are responsible for your own well-being. And something else happens, something subtle but incredibly powerful. The world starts treating you differently. People sense when someone has strong boundaries. They feel your inner confidence. They realize they cannot manipulate you with guilt, pressure, or emotional games. Toxic people leave on their own because they can no longer extract energy from you. Healthy people respect you more because you respect yourself. Your relationships improve because they are built on authenticity, not desperation. Strong souls walk alone because they know solitude is where boundaries are born. When you are no longer afraid of being alone, you no longer keep people who harm your spirit. You understand that anyone who genuinely loves you will respect your limits, honor your space, and value your peace. And anyone who cannot handle your boundaries is simply not aligned with your path. In the end, solitude teaches you one of the greatest truths. You cannot control how others treat you, but you can control what you allow. And once you learn to protect your peace without guilt, you become untouchable. You carry a quiet strength that no manipulation can break, no guilt trap can shake, and no person can overpower. That is the gift of walking alone. That is the power of loving your own company. And that is why boundaries become easier, stronger, and more natural when solitude becomes your ally. 7. Once you love being alone, you become unbreakable. There comes a moment in every person's journey where they realize that the greatest transformation of their life did not happen in a crowd, nor in the noise of the world, nor in the presence of people who constantly demanded pieces of them. The transformation happened in silence, in solitude, in that quiet space where there were no distractions, no expectations, no noise, only the raw truth of who they are and who they are becoming. When you finally learn to love your own company, something extraordinary awakens inside you. You build a level of inner strength that no person, no loss, no betrayal, and no circumstance can ever take away. This is the moment where you become truly unbreakable. Most people fear being alone because they associate solitude with emptiness. They think being alone means no one loves them, no one supports them, no one cares. But the truth is the opposite. Being alone gives you the chance to build a love within yourself so strong that you no longer live in fear of losing anyone. You start discovering a version of yourself that you never met before, the version that doesn't need constant reassurance to feel worthy, the version that doesn't need attention to feel valuable, the version that doesn't rely on outside affection to feel complete. When you learn to enjoy your own presence, loneliness turns into empowerment. Silence becomes peaceful. Solitude becomes sacred. Buddhism teaches that the greatest suffering comes from attachment, the attachment to people, to approval, to external validation, to outcomes you cannot control. When your happiness is attached to something outside of you, you live in a fragile state where anyone can shake your peace simply by withdrawing their love or changing their mind. But when you build your joy from within, nothing outside can destroy it. Once you love being alone, your attachment to external sources of happiness dissolves. You become a whole person, not a half searching for completion. Something remarkable happens when you stop fearing your own company. You stop tolerating certain behaviors. You stop making excuses for people who mistreat you. You stop allowing relationships where you constantly give more than you receive. You stop sacrificing your sanity just to keep someone in your life. Instead of holding on to people who drain you, you let them go with calmness, because you know you will be perfectly fine without them. Your heart becomes wise enough to understand that not everyone deserves access to you. Your mind becomes clear enough to recognize when someone's presence disturbs your spirit. Your soul becomes strong enough to walk away without looking back. When you love being alone, you no longer chase anyone. Not because you are cold, not because you have an ego, but because you finally understand that the right connections never require you to abandon yourself. You stop running after people who don't value you. You stop begging for attention. You stop shrinking yourself to be accepted. You stop fearing the loss of people who aren't meant to stay. Instead, you make decisions based on your peace rather than your loneliness. And that is the beginning of unshakable inner power. Solitude also gives you the ability to control your emotions in a way that most people never learn. When you sit alone with your thoughts without running from them, you develop emotional discipline. You start understanding your triggers. You become aware of the patterns that make you react impulsively. You learn to manage your anger, your sadness, your anxiety, and your fear. You begin to respond to life instead of reacting to it. This emotional self-control becomes one of your greatest strengths. The world loses its ability to manipulate you emotionally because your reactions no longer control you. And with this skill, you become resilient in situations that would have broken the old you. Once you love being alone, life also becomes much clearer. Decisions that once confused you now feel obvious. Situations that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable. People who once hurt you now appear transparent. You see their intentions clearly. You become harder to fool, harder to mislead, and harder to emotionally provoke. Not because you've become cynical, but because solitude sharpened your intuition, strengthened your boundaries, and helped you grow into a person who trusts their inner judgment more than any external voice. And something even more profound happens. You begin to enjoy life on your own terms. You create routines that nourish you. You develop habits that make you stronger. You pursue dreams that truly belong to you, not dreams someone else planted in your mind. You stop rushing. You stop comparing. You stop forcing yourself into boxes that society created. You learn to live gently, peacefully, intentionally. You become grounded, steady, and self-assured. Your energy becomes calmer. Your presence becomes stronger. Your mind becomes clearer. You finally understand what peace feels like, and you refuse to let anything disturb it. People notice this transformation. They sense the shift in your energy. They see the strength in your silence. They feel the confidence in your calmness. They recognize that you are no longer someone who can be controlled with guilt or fear. You are no longer someone who chases validation or approval. You are no longer someone who panics when left alone. You have become someone who is rooted in their own soul. Someone who walks through life with quiet certainty. Someone who is no longer breakable. When you reach this level of inner mastery, relationships become healthier because they are built on freedom, not fear. You meet people from a place of fullness, not emptiness. You connect from a place of strength, not from desperation. You give without losing yourself. You love without abandoning your boundaries. You care without sacrificing your dignity. You know when to stay, and you know when to walk away with calmness, without resentment, and without losing yourself. This is the kind of soul you become when you embrace solitude. Calm, grounded, compassionate, intuitive, self-sufficient, and emotionally powerful. A soul that can stand alone without trembling. A soul that can heal itself without depending on others. A soul that understands its own worth so deeply that no rejection can erase it and no loss can diminish it. Once you love being alone, you become unbreakable because your peace no longer comes from the outside. It comes from the quiet sanctuary you built within yourself. It comes from the acceptance you found in your own reflection. It comes from the wisdom you discovered in silence. It comes from the boundaries you learned to honor. It comes from the wounds you healed in solitude. It comes from the strength you developed when no one was watching. And that is why the strongest souls always walk alone, not because they want to escape the world, but because they have learned to return to themselves. Not because they reject people, but because they refuse to reject themselves. Not because they enjoy isolation, but because they have found freedom in their own presence. When solitude becomes your home, the world can no longer shake you. People can no longer break you. Life can no longer control you. You are whole. You are centered. You are untouchable. This is the final and greatest power. Solitude gives you the power to live life with an unbreakable inner foundation. The kind of foundation that allows you to move through the world with clarity, with strength, with peace, and with a deep, quiet confidence that comes from knowing you already have everything you need within yourself. 8. When you walk alone long enough, you meet the real you, and that changes everything. Most people go through their entire life without ever meeting their true self. They play roles, wear masks, hide their emotions, suppress their dreams, and shape their personality to fit the expectations of the world around them. From childhood, they learn to behave in ways that please others, to think in ways that are acceptable, to dream in ways that society approves, and to talk in ways that don't make anyone uncomfortable. They spend so much time adjusting, adapting, pretending, and performing that they lose sight of the person they actually are. Their identity becomes a reflection of the people around them, not a reflection of their soul. They don't realize that most of their personality was built out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough. But solitude changes all of this. When you walk alone long enough, when you remove distractions, when you stop absorbing the emotions of others, when you stop trying to meet expectations you never agreed to, something incredible begins to happen. You start noticing the pieces of yourself that have been hiding beneath years of noise. You begin to uncover the layers of your identity that you buried to survive. You start to feel the desires, the dreams, the fears, the wounds, and the strengths that belong to you, not the version of you that the world molded. Solitude gives you the first real chance to meet yourself without the interference of anyone else's voice. At first, this process can feel strange because many people have gone so long without listening to themselves that their inner voice feels unfamiliar. You might feel a sense of discomfort rising when silence surrounds you. But that discomfort is not danger. It is your true self trying to speak for the first time after years of being ignored. With time, you begin to recognize that this voice isn't here to judge you or criticize you. It's here to tell you the truth. Solitude creates space for your authentic self to appear, gently and quietly, like a bird that only lands when the world is still. Buddhism teaches that the greatest illusion is the false identity created by attachment, expectations, and the ego. When you spend your life performing a role, you become disconnected from your essence. But when you walk alone, truly alone, you slowly peel away the layers of ego that were built for protection. You discover who you are when no one is watching, when no one is influencing you, when no one is questioning your choices. You begin to feel your own energy for the first time. You begin to see your own patterns clearly. You learn what makes your heart expand and what makes it shrink. You learn what gives you peace and what steals it. You learn what kind of life your spirit has been trying to lead you toward. As you get closer to your true self, something even more powerful happens. You start questioning the beliefs you adopted without thinking. You begin to realize that some of your opinions weren't really yours. They belonged to the people around you. Some of your goals weren't yours. They were planted in your mind by society. Some of your fears weren't yours. They were inherited from others. Solitude helps you clean out the mental clutter you've been carrying. It gives you the freedom to ask, who am I when I am not performing? Who am I when I am not trying to impress anyone? Who am I when I am not afraid of being judged? The answers that arise in solitude are the most honest answers you will ever find. Slowly, your relationship with yourself becomes deeper, kinder, and more intimate. You begin to trust your instincts because you're no longer clouded by external opinions. You begin to respect your emotions because you finally understand where they come from. You begin to see your flaws with compassion rather than shame. You begin to see your strengths without downplaying them. You learn that you are not too much and you are not too little. You are exactly who you're meant to be. The more time you spend meeting yourself, the more you realize that you were never broken. You were simply buried under layers that didn't belong to you. As solitude deepens, you stop running away from your mind and start understanding it. You stop hiding from your emotions and start listening to them. You stop numbing your wounds and start healing them. You begin to enjoy your own company, not because you hate people, not because you want to isolate yourself, but because your inner world becomes a peaceful place. You no longer need external noise to feel alive. You no longer need constant interaction to feel connected. You no longer fear being alone because your own presence feels comforting, grounding, and safe. For the first time, you realize that the one person who will walk with you through every moment of your life is you. And solitude teaches you how to make that relationship loving instead of painful. Another profound transformation happens when you begin to love your own presence. You stop tolerating anything that disturbs your inner peace. You no longer stay in relationships that suffocate your spirit. You no longer entertain conversations that drain your energy. You no longer participate in environments where you must abandon yourself to be accepted. You no longer allow people to disrespect your boundaries just to avoid conflict. Because when you love being alone, peace becomes your priority. And you protect that peace, even if it means walking away from people you once cared about. When you know who you truly are, manipulation no longer works on you. Guilt-tripping no longer affects you. Emotional pressure no longer bends you. Validation becomes a gift, not a need. Approval becomes pleasant, not necessary. You move through life with a quiet certainty because you know your worth is not dependent on how others see you. This is what makes you unshakable. Not cold, not emotionless. Simply grounded in your own identity. Solitude also helps you access the parts of your soul that were left unexplored. Your creativity, your passions, your hidden talents, the dreams you suppressed, the thoughts you never expressed. When you walk alone, you unlock your inner world. You begin to feel enthusiasm for things you forgot you loved. You start doing activities that nourish your mind and body. You reconnect with your childhood joys and your adult ambitions. You discover new interests you never had the chance to explore because you were too busy filling your time with noise and obligations. Solitude becomes the fertile soil where your potential grows. The longer you walk alone, the more you realize that being alone is not the absence of connection, it is the presence of self. You feel connected to your spirit in a way that brings clarity, gentleness, and strength. You feel connected to life in a more conscious and peaceful way. You notice beauty you used to overlook. You appreciate silence rather than fearing it. You start living with awareness instead of running on autopilot. The final stage of this journey is the most powerful. You become whole. You reach a level of inner completeness where relationships become choices, not dependencies. You give love freely, not desperately. You express yourself without fear. You attract people who resonate with your energy because your authenticity is no longer buried. You inspire others simply by being yourself. You no longer feel the need to explain who you are or justify your boundaries or prove your worth. You are enough, and you know it. And once you reach this point, you experience a freedom that few people ever taste, a freedom from emotional chaos, from fear, from insecurity, from external control. Solitude becomes your home, your sanctuary, your teacher, and your strength. You become someone who can stand alone in a room full of people and still feel centered. Someone who can walk away from anything that harms their peace. Someone who doesn't collapse when life becomes difficult. Someone who doesn't lose themselves when others leave. Someone who is rooted in their own truth. This is the greatest gift solitude gives you, the discovery of your true self. Once you've met that version of you, free, strong, whole, awakened, there is no going back. You will never again accept a life that forces you to hide your soul. You will never again fear silence. You will never again betray your own spirit to be accepted. You will never again tolerate relationships that cost you your peace, because you finally know who you are. And once you know who you are, you become unbreakable. 9. The more you walk alone, the less the world can control you. One of the deepest truths you will ever learn on your spiritual journey is this: the world only controls those who fear being alone. As long as you are afraid of your own company, you will always be vulnerable to manipulation, pressure, expectations, guilt, and emotional traps. People can influence you because they know you don't want to lose them. They know you fear silence. They know you fear walking alone. That fear becomes a leash around your soul, pulling you in directions that don't belong to you. But once you learn to walk alone, truly walk alone, the entire dynamic of your life changes. The world loses its power over you, and you regain the authority you never realized you had. Most of the suffering people experience in relationships, friendships, workplaces, and even family systems comes from the fear of losing connection. They tolerate disrespect because they don't want to be abandoned. They hide their truth to avoid conflict. They silence their voice so they won't upset someone. They pretend to be okay so no one will walk away. They agree to things that damage their soul just to keep the peace externally. They live in a constant state of emotional compromise, sacrificing their inner peace for outer harmony. But this harmony is an illusion because it demands the destruction of authenticity. Solitude breaks this cycle. The moment you begin to spend time alone willingly, not as punishment, not as isolation, but as intentional self-connection, you activate a power inside you that many never discover. You start realizing that your happiness, your peace, your worth, your emotions, and your identity do not depend on anyone else. You learn that connection is meaningful only when it's healthy, not when it's forced. You learn that being alone is much less painful than being surrounded by people who empty you. You learn that silence is far more peaceful than conversations filled with tension. You learn that the loneliness you feared was actually freedom waiting for you to return. As you walk alone more often, you begin to see how much of your life was shaped by the fear of what others might think. You held back your dreams because you feared judgment. You stayed in situations that made you unhappy because you feared criticism. You chose paths that weren't yours because you feared disappointing others. But solitude reveals the illusion behind these fears. You begin to understand that people only have power over you to the degree that you fear losing them. Once that fear dissolves, your spirit becomes untouchable. Buddhism teaches that liberation comes when you detach from external control. Most people misunderstand this. They think detachment means not caring about anything or anyone. But true detachment means caring deeply without letting your well-being depend on others. It means loving without losing yourself. It means supporting others without abandoning your own needs. It means giving without draining your spirit. Solitude helps you build this balance. When you walk alone, you learn to give from a place of strength instead of desperation. Another profound shift begins to happen. When you spend more time alone, you stop reacting to everything. You stop feeling pressured to explain yourself. You stop letting criticism define you. You stop allowing other people's moods or opinions to affect your inner state. When the world sees that you no longer react, it stops trying to control you. Because control only works when you respond emotionally. When you become grounded and centered within yourself, other people's behaviors lose their power to shake you. You see situations clearly without panic. You choose your responses wisely. You move through life with calmness instead of chaos. Solitude also builds emotional independence. Before walking alone, you may have relied on others to regulate your emotions. You needed someone to comfort you when you were sad, someone to validate you when you were insecure, someone to distract you when you were anxious, someone to show you love so you could feel worthy. But when you spend time alone, you learn to soothe your own heart. You learn to give yourself the love you used to seek externally. You learn to be gentle with yourself. You learn to sit through emotional storms without collapsing. You learn that your inner world is strong enough to carry you. And once you master emotional independence, you become magnetic, not needy. The world respects a person who doesn't need anything, not because they are cold, but because they radiate self-sufficiency. You no longer cling to anyone. You no longer settle for the bare minimum. You no longer chase after people who show you inconsistent affection. You no longer break apart when someone withdraws their attention. You no longer lose your identity in relationships. You walk with a quiet power because your spirit is nourished from within, not from the outside. As you continue walking alone, you develop a clarity about people that you never had before. You start seeing intentions clearly. You start feeling energies deeply. You start recognizing emotional patterns instantly. You become harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, and harder to mislead. You know when someone is genuine and when someone is pretending. You know when someone respects you and when someone only uses you for emotional comfort, validation, or convenience. Solitude opens your eyes to truths that noise hides. This clarity changes the way you invite people into your life. Instead of accepting everyone who enters, you start evaluating who deserves to stay. You stop letting people close who don't value your presence. You stop giving energy to those who don't reciprocate. You stop allowing people to return after they've broken your trust. You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. You've learned how precious your peace is, and you protect it with boundaries that are no longer negotiable. One of the greatest transformations solitude brings is a deep sense of inner freedom. You are no longer tied to external validation. You are no longer attached to temporary attention. You are no longer influenced by the emotional storms of others. You are no longer afraid of being misunderstood or judged. You live from within, not from outside. This inner freedom allows you to move through life with authenticity. You say what you mean without fear. You follow your purpose without hesitation. You choose paths that align with your soul, not with society's expectations. People begin to notice your transformation. They see the way you carry yourself calm, steady, unmoved. They feel the strength in your silence, the confidence in your presence, the independence in your choices. Some will admire you, some will fear you, some will misunderstand you, but none will be able to control you, because you have built a foundation inside your heart that no one can touch. Walking alone teaches you that your value does not come from being chosen by others. It comes from choosing yourself. Your worth does not come from being wanted. It comes from being whole. Your peace does not come from others making space for you. It comes from you creating your own space. When solitude becomes your ally, you stop negotiating your value. You stop begging for love. You stop apologizing for your existence. You start living with dignity. And as solitude deepens, something even more powerful happens. You become unshakably content with your life. You appreciate simple moments. You enjoy your routines. You find beauty in stillness. You feel grateful for peace. You stop chasing what is unstable and start nurturing what is real. You don't need constant excitement to feel alive. You don't need constant interaction to feel connected. You don't need constant validation to feel worthy. You are enough for yourself, and that brings a sense of serenity that nothing else can match. When you reach this stage, the world can no longer control you, not through love, not through fear, not through rejection, not through pressure, not through judgment, not through expectation. You become spiritually self-owned. Your heart becomes your sanctuary. Your mind becomes your ally. Your soul becomes your compass. This is why the strongest souls walk alone, not because they dislike people, but because they refuse to be controlled by the fear of losing them. They know that true freedom comes from within. They know that peace is an inside job. They know that self-connection is the highest form of strength. Once you learn to walk alone without fear, the world loses its grip on you. You become someone no one can break, no one can manipulate, no one can silence, and no one can lead away from your purpose. You move through life with a quiet, powerful independence that radiates strength, and in that independence, you finally find yourself. 10. The path of walking alone leads you to a life you never knew you deserved. There is a moment in your journey when solitude transforms from something you fear into something you cherish, and then into something that elevates you beyond anything you ever imagined for yourself. Most people think walking alone is only about healing wounds or building strength, but solitude goes far beyond that. It becomes the gateway to an entirely new level of life, one that is peaceful, intentional, meaningful, and deeply aligned with who you truly are. When you walk alone long enough, your whole reality begins to shift. You start creating a life that feels like it finally matches the person you were meant to become. And that life is far more beautiful than the one you were living when your soul was suffocated by noise, expectations, and emotional dependence. Most people live in a constant state of reaction, reacting to their surroundings, reacting to other people's moods, reacting to pressure, reacting to society's expectations. They don't make choices from clarity. They make choices from fear, obligation, or habit. Their life becomes a pattern. Wake up, follow routines they didn't choose, meet expectations they didn't set, pursue goals they didn't define, and maintain relationships they don't feel connected to. They live on autopilot because they have never had the space to question what they truly want. They follow paths that were handed to them by family, culture, or the people they tried to please, and in that process, they lose themselves. But the moment you begin walking alone, your entire inner world slows down. You stop rushing through life. You stop numbing your discomfort with distractions. You stop allowing noise to guide your path. Silence opens space in your mind where clarity begins to grow. You start looking at your life with honest eyes, without the influence of anyone else. You begin to ask yourself questions you never had time or courage to ask before. What kind of life do I really want to live? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of relationships does my soul need? What kind of environment brings me peace? What dreams have I buried because someone told me they were unrealistic? These questions rise naturally when you walk alone, and the answers come from the deepest part of you. Buddhism teaches that insight arises in stillness. When the mind is quiet, truth appears. Solitude gives you the stillness required to see your life clearly, without illusions, without pressure, and without noise. You realize which parts of your life were built from fear rather than authenticity. You recognize which decisions were made from insecurity instead of wisdom. You see which relationships were rooted in attachment instead of genuine connection. This clarity is not painful, it is liberating. It gives you back the power to shape your life with intention instead of drifting through it unconsciously. As you spend more time connected with yourself, you start noticing subtle shifts in your desires. What once excited you may no longer appeal to you. What once drained you becomes intolerable. You begin to feel drawn toward things that nourish your spirit rather than things that feed your ego. You want less superficial interaction and more meaningful connection. You want fewer possessions and more peace. You want fewer people but deeper bonds. You want fewer distractions and more presence. You want fewer obligations and more purpose. Solitude realigns your values with your soul rather than with society. This realignment is where the transformation truly begins. You no longer choose things because they look good from the outside. You choose them because they feel right internally. You stop pretending. You stop impressing. You stop proving. You stop chasing validation. You start building a life that honors your inner world. And for the first time, life begins to flow from the inside out, not the other way around. One of the greatest gifts of walking alone is that your self-worth becomes unshakable. When you learn to enjoy your own company, when you no longer need someone to make you feel complete, when you no longer rely on external affection to feel valuable, you create a foundation inside you that is stronger than stone. You no longer settle for relationships that hurt your spirit because you know your worth. You no longer stay in places that drain your peace because you know what peace feels like. You no longer chase attention because your soul is finally nourished from within. And when your sense of worth comes from yourself, you cannot be broken by others. This inner strength affects every part of your life. You start making decisions without fear. You trust your intuition more deeply. You become patient with your growth. You no longer rush into relationships just to avoid being alone. You no longer cling to situations that don't serve you. You no longer feel pressured to live according to someone else's timeline. Walking alone teaches you to live life at your own pace, aligned with your own truth, guided by your own wisdom. Over time, solitude expands your vision. You start seeing possibilities you never considered before. You feel more connected to your purpose. You gain the courage to try new things, explore new paths, and pursue dreams with confidence. You realize that you are capable of much more than you once believed. Fear loses its grip on you because your mind has grown strong in the quiet. When you stop fearing loneliness, you start embracing freedom. And once you taste freedom, you cannot go back to anything that restricts your spirit. Another powerful transformation occurs when solitude deepens your spiritual connection. You begin to understand yourself in ways that feel almost mystical. You sense energies clearly. You feel your emotions more truthfully. You hear your intuition louder. You develop a deeper awareness of your thoughts, your patterns, and your inner blocks. You begin to love yourself not as an idea but as an experience. Your relationship with yourself becomes sacred. And when your relationship with yourself becomes sacred, every other relationship becomes healthier. You experience life with more presence. You value small moments deeply. The silence in the morning, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of your breath, the stillness of your mind. You stop rushing through your days. You start living in them. This presence becomes your superpower. It allows you to think clearly, love consciously, and live peacefully. Slowly, you begin building a life that reflects your true essence, not the person you were before healing, but the person you are becoming through it. You choose friends who respect your spirit. You create routines that nurture your well-being. You pursue work that aligns with your purpose. You design your days around peace rather than pressure. You protect your mind as if it were a temple. You become someone who lives intentionally, not reactively. And the life that forms from this inner transformation is completely different from the one you lived before solitude. It is calmer, richer, more aligned, more meaningful, more grounded. It reflects your soul rather than your wounds. It reflects your truth rather than your fears. It reflects your growth rather than your past. This is the life you never knew. You deserve the life that was waiting for you on the other side of walking alone. When you reach this stage, nothing the world does can control you. No insult can define you. No rejection can break you. No expectation can bend you. No loss can destroy you. Because you are rooted in yourself. You are whole within yourself. You are guided by your own wisdom, and you are finally living a life that belongs to you. This is the final revelation solitude offers. When you walk alone long enough, you don't just become stronger, you become awakened. You don't just survive life, you start creating it. You don't just protect your peace, you build a reality where peace is your natural state. This is the transformation that only solitude can give, and once you experience it, you never want to return to who you were before. 11. The more comfortable you become in your own silence, the more loudly life reveals its truths to you. There is a kind of silence that feels empty, painful, or uncomfortable at first, a silence that most people try to avoid by filling it with distractions, conversations, entertainment, or meaningless noise. But there is another kind of silence, a higher silence, a sacred silence that only reveals itself once you become truly comfortable with being alone. This silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of truth. It is a silence that speaks directly to your soul, revealing things you could never see when your mind was crowded with noise. When you walk alone long enough to embrace this silence, life begins to reveal its hidden truths slowly, gently, and profoundly. Most people do not know the power of silence because they have never stayed in it long enough to access its wisdom. The moment things become quiet, they reach for their phone, for music, for people, for distractions, anything to avoid hearing their own thoughts. They fear silence because silence forces them to face themselves. Silence brings emotion to the surface. Silence awakens memories they buried. Silence reveals truths they tried to avoid. Silence exposes who they really are beneath the performance they show the world. And because this can feel overwhelming, they spend years running from silence instead of learning from it. But when you walk alone, when you intentionally create space free from distraction and external noise, when you sit with yourself long enough without trying to escape, the meaning of silence transforms. Slowly, you stop fearing quiet moments. Your mind begins to settle, your heart begins to soften, your breath deepens, your thoughts lose their frantic speed. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like freedom. What once felt like loneliness begins to feel like peace. What once felt like stillness begins to feel like clarity. This shift is the beginning of an inner awakening. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like water. When it is shaken, disturbed, full of movement, it becomes cloudy. You cannot see anything clearly. Not your emotions, not your intentions, not your path. But when the water becomes still, everything becomes visible. Silence is the stillness that settles the inner water. It reveals everything that was hidden beneath the surface of your mind. You begin to understand your feelings with more clarity. You begin to see your patterns with more honesty. You begin to hear your intuition with more sharpness. You begin to recognize your truth, not filtered through fear or external opinion, but in its pure form. As you grow more comfortable in your own silence, life begins to send you signals that you never noticed before. You begin to see patterns in your relationships: who respects you, who drains you, who values your presence, who only wants your energy, who truly cares, and who manipulates subtly. These patterns were always there, but noise blinded you. Silence opens your eyes. You begin to understand your emotional triggers and where they come from. You begin to see how certain wounds shaped your reactions. You begin to see how much of your personality was built as protection. You begin to see which goals are truly yours and which ones were planted in your mind by others. As silence deepens, your intuition becomes louder. You no longer ignore the gut feelings you once dismissed. You sense when someone is not sincere. You sense when a situation is wrong for you. You sense when an opportunity is aligned with your destiny. You sense which direction your life should move toward. The quiet voice inside you, the one you used to drown out, becomes your guide. And unlike the voices of the world, your inner voice is never wrong, never misleading, never manipulative. It speaks with truth, not fear. You also begin to understand life on a deeper level when you walk alone. You realize that much of the suffering you once experienced came from resisting reality, from expecting life to follow your plans, from trying to control outcomes that weren't yours to control. But silence teaches surrender, not the weak surrender that comes from giving up, but the wise surrender that comes from trusting the flow of life. You start seeing how everything happens in its own timing, not when you demand it. You start seeing how endings are actually beginnings. You start seeing how rejection protected you. You start seeing how delays shaped you. You start seeing how pain awakened you. These truths cannot be seen through noise. They can only be seen through silence. Another powerful transformation occurs. You stop getting pulled into emotional chaos. Before solitude, before silence, you might have reacted to everything, to people's words, to their moods, to their opinions, to situations you couldn't control. but silence strengthens your emotional center. You begin to respond rather than react. You become harder to trigger. You remain calm even when others are chaotic. You stay grounded even when situations are unpredictable. You see things as they are, not as your emotions paint them. Silence gives you emotional mastery, and emotional mastery makes you unbreakable. As you continue walking alone and deepening your relationship with silence, something even more profound happens. You start living with intention. Most people drift through life, going through routines, following habits, repeating patterns, without truly thinking about why they do what they do. But silence brings awareness. Awareness brings intention, and intention transforms your entire existence. You begin choosing your actions based on clarity, not impulse. You begin choosing relationships based on alignment, not loneliness. You begin choosing work based on purpose, not pressure. You begin choosing your life based on truth, not expectation. You stop living reactively, you start living consciously. Over time, silence also reveals the beauty of simplicity. You begin to appreciate small moments deeply, the softness of morning light, the quiet of afternoon air, the sound of your breath, the comfort of your own presence. Life stops feeling like a race. It becomes a gentle unfolding. You begin to enjoy being alive rather than rushing through your days. You begin to feel gratitude for things you used to overlook. You begin to see that peace is not something you find elsewhere. It is something you uncover within. One of the greatest revelations silence brings is the understanding that you were never truly alone. You were always connected to something deeper, whether you call it intuition, spirit, consciousness, or the universe. Solitude makes you aware of an inner presence that guides you, protects you, and speaks through your heart. You begin to trust life more deeply because you learn to trust yourself. You begin to trust that what leaves your life was never meant to stay, and what stays was meant to grow with you. You learn that everything has a purpose, even silence. As you grow more intimate with your own silence, your life undergoes a remarkable transformation. Your boundaries become stronger because you now understand your energy. Your relationships become healthier because they are chosen, not forced. Your decisions become wiser because they come from clarity. Your heart becomes lighter because you release what no longer serves you. Your mind becomes calmer because you stop fighting life. Your spirit becomes more awake because silence reconnects you with your essence. And this is where the deepest truth emerges. The more comfortable you become in your own silence, the more the world reveals itself to you. You begin seeing life with wisdom rather than fear. You begin seeing people with compassion rather than attachment. You begin seeing experiences with understanding rather than resistance. You begin seeing yourself with love rather than criticism. Silence becomes your teacher, your guide, your healer, your sanctuary. And once you have learned to embrace the truths silence reveals, no noise can ever deceive you again. No chaos can ever overwhelm you again. No person can ever manipulate you again. No situation can ever control you again. You become a person who sees through illusions, who walks with intention, who lives with peace, and who carries a strength that radiates quietly but unmistakably. This is why the strongest souls walk alone, not to escape the world, but to understand it more deeply, not to avoid people, but to see them more clearly, not to live in isolation, but to live with awareness. Silence is not emptiness, it is truth. And once you learn to love that silence, you unlock the deepest wisdom life has been waiting to give you. 12. When you walk alone, you finally learn the difference between what you want and what you need. One of the most profound transformations that happens when you walk alone is the awakening of clarity, the kind of clarity that dissolves illusions, reveals hard truths, and separates your true needs from the desires and attachments you once mistook for necessities. Most people go through life thinking they know what they want. Certain relationships, certain forms of success, certain kinds of validation, certain goals, certain lifestyles. But much of what people chase is not born from truth, it is born from conditioning. It is born from the world's influence, from childhood wounds, from the fear of being left behind, from the desire to be accepted, from the need to prove something, or from the belief that happiness exists outside of them. When your life is full of people, noise, and distractions, it becomes almost impossible to tell the difference between what your soul wants and what your ego wants. You get so caught up in chasing things that were never meant for you that you lose sight of your inner compass. You confuse attention with love. You confuse excitement with fulfillment. You confuse comfort with purpose. You confuse temporary pleasure with long-term peace. Most people only realize this after years of walking down paths that don't feel right, investing their energy into people who were never aligned with them, or pursuing dreams that belong to someone else. But when you walk alone, truly alone, your entire understanding of desire shifts. Solitude strips away the noise that once shaped your thinking. It removes the influence of other people's expectations. It silences the pressure to conform. And in that silence, you begin to examine your desires with honesty. You ask yourself questions you never had the courage to face. Why do I want this? Is this dream genuinely mine? Is this relationship truly nourishing me? Is this goal aligned with my soul? Is this lifestyle bringing me peace or stress? Is this path helping me grow or keeping me stuck? These questions arise naturally when you walk alone, and the answers become impossible to ignore. Buddhism teaches that suffering is born from craving things we think we need, but which only make us more attached, more anxious, and more distracted from the present moment. When you walk alone, you begin to see how many of your cravings were illusions disguised as needs. You begin to understand how many of your desires were rooted in loneliness, insecurity, comparison, pressure, or unresolved pain. You begin to see which of your wants were merely attempts to fill an internal emptiness that only inner healing could resolve. Solitude removes illusion, and illusion can only survive in noise. As solitude deepens, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel the difference between wants that feed your ego and needs that feed your soul. Ego wants attention, validation, entertainment, approval, admiration, comfort, familiarity, and control. Soul needs peace, truth, authenticity, growth, healing, purpose, clarity, connection, and self-respect. When you walk alone, the ego becomes quieter, the soul becomes louder. Slowly, the desires that once consumed you lose their power. The people you once chased no longer hold the same pull. The goals you once obsessed over no longer feel important. The achievements you thought would complete you no longer define you. You stop craving things that were never meant to fill you. At the same time, you begin to recognize your true needs, the needs you ignored for years because the world taught you to prioritize everything except your own well-being. You learn that you need inner peace more than constant excitement. You learn that you need self-respect more than approval from others. You learn that you need emotional stability more than temporary affection. You learn that you need purpose more than distractions. You learn that you need boundaries more than acceptance. You learn that you need healing more than pretending to be strong. You learn that you need authenticity more than popularity. You learn that you need growth more than comfort. These truths rise like waves in the silence of solitude, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. Another profound shift occurs when you begin distinguishing between temporary emotions and long-term needs. Before walking alone, you might have mistaken loneliness for love, fear for passion, insecurity for desire, or attachment for connection. You might have held on to people or situations not because they were right for you, but because they filled a temporary emotional gap. But solitude teaches you emotional clarity. You begin to understand that not everything you feel is a sign, not every desire deserves to be followed, and not every attachment is healthy. You realize that some wants are simply impulses, while needs are truths that stay steady even when emotions fade. Walking alone also helps you recognize how often the world tricks you into believing you need things that are actually harming you. You begin to see how consumer culture, social media, and societal expectations create artificial desires that steal your time, your energy, and your peace. You see how you were conditioned to want a life that wasn't truly yours. You see how you measured your happiness by standards that didn't reflect your soul's calling. Solitude breaks these illusions. It frees you from the world's hypnotic spell of more, and guides you back to what actually matters. As solitude sharpens your inner knowing, you start making choices from alignment rather than impulse. You choose relationships that nurture your growth instead of ones that feed your loneliness. You choose work that aligns with your values instead of jobs that drain your spirit. You choose environments that make you feel alive instead of ones that suffocate your essence. You choose habits that strengthen your mind instead of ones that numb your emotions. You choose a lifestyle that reflects your truth instead of trends. You build a life that feels like home for your soul. And most importantly, you choose yourself not from selfishness, but from self-realization. One of the greatest gifts solitude provides is the courage to walk away from what you want when it is not what you need. Without solitude, people cling to things they know are wrong for them because they mistake desire for destiny. But solitude gives you the strength to release things that no longer align with your soul. You learn to let go of relationships that disrupt your peace, opportunities that feel forced, dreams that no longer resonate, and habits that harm your growth. You stop trying to fit into spaces that shrink your spirit. You stop chasing what is unstable. You stop forcing what is not meant to be. You stop betraying your needs for your wants. This act of letting go becomes easier because solitude teaches you self-sufficiency. When you no longer depend on external sources for your happiness, you no longer cling to them out of fear. You know you can thrive alone. You know you can heal alone. You know you can rebuild alone. This inner security empowers you to make decisions that serve your future rather than your immediate emotions. You become someone who chooses long-term alignment over short-term comfort. As your understanding deepens, you begin to design your life based on your soul's needs rather than society's ideals. You simplify your world. You cut out unnecessary noise. You focus on what brings you peace and meaning. You create space for healing, reflection, creativity, and growth. You surround yourself only with people who honor your energy. You become intentional with your time, your energy, your emotions, and your choices. Your life begins to reflect your essence instead of your fears. And then something profound happens. You realize that by letting go of what you only wanted, you made room for what you truly needed. You discover relationships that are deeper, calmer, and more genuine. You find opportunities that align with your purpose. You experience peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. You feel grounded, centered, and whole. You attract experiences that resonate with your true self purely because you are living in alignment. This is the secret that solitude reveals. Wanting is often loud, impulsive, emotional, and restless. But needing is quiet, steady, clear, and soul-rooted. When you walk alone long enough, you learn to listen to the quiet truth rather than the loud craving. You learn to trust your inner guidance over your temporary emotions. You learn to build a life that honors your needs, not your impulses. And once you reach this level of clarity, your life transforms in ways you never imagined. You no longer feel lost because you know what you need to feel whole. You no longer feel trapped because you have the courage to walk away. You no longer feel confused because your intuition has become your compass. You no longer feel empty because you nourish your soul with what truly matters. You no longer feel dependent because you have found strength in your own presence. This is why walking alone is such a powerful spiritual journey. It reveals the difference between wanting and needing. It frees you from illusions. It guides you toward truth. It leads you to a life that is aligned, peaceful, and meaningful. And once you see this difference clearly, you never again let your wants blind you to your needs. You start living with purpose, wisdom, and emotional independence. You stop chasing illusions and start cultivating reality. Solitude teaches you that what you need is always greater than what you want, because needs come from the soul and wants come from the ego. And when you build your life on the foundation of your soul, you create a life that cannot be destroyed by circumstances, emotions, or people. You create a life that is truly yours. 13. When you master being alone, you move through life without fear, and that changes everything. Most people live their lives quietly controlled by fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of losing people, fear of disappointing others, fear of judgment, fear of starting over, fear of ending relationships, fear of speaking their truth, fear of being misunderstood, fear of choosing a path that others won't approve, fear of failing, fear of being alone. This fear shapes their decisions, builds their habits, forms their relationships, and locks them into lives that don't reflect who they truly are. They stay in situations that drain their soul because they are afraid of the emptiness that might come if they leave. They silence their inner voice because they are afraid of conflict. They lower their standards because they are afraid of rejection. They cling to people who hurt them because they are afraid to walk alone. But something extraordinary happens when you walk alone long enough that solitude becomes natural, peaceful, and empowering you. Begin to realize how much of your life was built on fear. And the moment you realize this, something inside you shifts. You begin shedding the fears that once controlled you. You stop living like a prisoner of your emotions, and you start living like a person who finally trusts themselves. Solitude becomes the training ground where courage is built, clarity is sharpened, and emotional independence takes root. When you master being alone, fear loses its power over you. At first, walking alone feels uncomfortable because your fears rise to the surface. You feel the fear of silence, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of not knowing what comes next, the fear of losing people you relied on. These fears rush up because solitude leaves no space to hide from them. But instead of running from fear as you once did, you begin to sit with it. You start examining it. You begin to understand where it comes from. And the more you understand your fears, the more they dissolve. Fear thrives in avoidance, but it weakens in awareness. Buddhism teaches that fear is not an enemy. It is a teacher. It shows you where you are still attached, where you still resist reality, where you are still wounded, and where you do not yet trust yourself. Solitude forces you to face these fears with honesty. You begin to realize that the things you feared most were not actually dangerous, they were simply unknown. You feared being alone because you did not know yourself. You feared silence because you never experienced the peace on the other side of it. You feared walking away because you didn't believe you were strong enough to rebuild. But solitude reveals that you are strong enough. You always were. You just needed the space to see it. As you walk alone more deeply, you begin to release the fear of losing people. Before solitude, you may have clung to relationships, even unhealthy ones, because you were afraid of what life would feel like without them. But once you become comfortable alone, that fear disappears. You realize that you can support yourself emotionally. You realize that you can provide your own stability. You realize that your peace does not depend on someone else's presence. You learn that losing people does not break you. Losing yourself does. And once you understand this, You stop tolerating the unbearable just to avoid the uncomfortable. Solitude also dissolves the fear of judgment. When you are constantly surrounded by others, their opinions shape your choices. You censor your truth. You conform to expectations. You become who they want you to be. But when you walk alone, you rediscover your authentic voice. You begin to value your own approval more than the approval of others. You begin to trust your intuition more than the opinions of the world. You understand that people's judgments are reflections of their own minds, not reflections of your worth. You become free to live for yourself honestly, courageously, unapologetically. As fear dissolves, you begin making decisions that align with your growth, instead of decisions that avoid discomfort. You take risks you once avoided. You leave situations you once tolerated. You try things you once feared. You speak truths you once buried. You set boundaries you once felt guilty for. You choose yourself in ways you never thought possible. This courage does not come from becoming colder. It comes from becoming wiser. You no longer seek safety in others. You find it within. One of the most powerful transformations solitude brings is the disappearance of the fear of starting over. Many people stay in broken relationships, dead friendships, toxic environments, or miserable routines because they fear beginning again. They fear the unknown. They fear taking the first step. They fear stepping into a life without the people or patterns they depended on. But once solitude shows you that you can survive anything, you no longer fear the unknown. You begin to trust your ability to rebuild. You trust your resilience. You trust your strength. You trust that life supports those who support themselves. You trust that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon your peace. This trust becomes the foundation of your courage. Another fear that dissolves is the fear of being misunderstood. When you walk alone, you begin to understand yourself so deeply that external misunderstandings no longer bother you. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You no longer seek validation for your choices. You no longer feel threatened by others' opinions. You live with a quiet confidence because you know your truth. You no longer need anyone to agree with your journey. You know your path is yours alone. As solitude deepens, you also release the fear of rejection. Rejection stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like redirection. You begin to understand that people leaving your life does not diminish your worth. You no longer chase after those who walk away. You no longer beg for love, attention, or recognition. You understand that what leaves is not meant for your next chapter. You accept that loss is part of growth. Your relationship with yourself becomes so strong that no external loss can break your inner foundation. Solitude also eradicates the fear of emotional pain. Before walking alone, you may have avoided certain truths, memories, or emotions because you feared the discomfort they brought. But solitude teaches you that pain is temporary, while avoidance creates suffering. When you allow yourself to feel without running away, pain becomes a path to clarity. It becomes a source of wisdom. It becomes a tool for liberation. You stop fearing your emotions because you learn how to sit with them, understand them, and release them. This emotional maturity becomes your shield. And then you reach the highest level of transformation, the dissolution of the fear of life itself. You stop fearing change. You stop fearing growth. You stop fearing uncertainty. You stop fearing the future. You live with a sense of flow, trust, and surrender. You understand that life is not something to fight, it is something to experience, moment by moment, with awareness and acceptance. This fearlessness doesn't make you reckless. It makes you grounded. It doesn't make you detached. It makes you deeply connected. It doesn't make you emotionless. It makes you emotionally free. You become someone who can walk through storms with steady breath, someone who can face endings with dignity, someone who can navigate challenges with clarity, someone who makes choices from strength, not fear. People begin to sense this change. They feel the confidence in your silence. They feel the strength in your energy. They feel the stability in your presence. You no longer respond from weakness. You respond from wisdom. You no longer cling from insecurity. You choose from clarity. You no longer live from fear. You live from truth. This is why the strongest souls walk alone, not because they reject love or connection, but because they have eliminated fear from their foundation. They love without attachment. They give without losing themselves. They connect without dependence. They trust without desperation. They speak without fear. They live without apology. Once you master being alone, you no longer fear life. And once you no longer fear life, you finally begin to live it. 14. Walking alone teaches you to rise above the world's noise and live from a higher state of consciousness. There comes a point in the journey of solitude where the transformation becomes so deep, so internal, and so subtle that people around you cannot understand what is happening within you. Externally, your life might look quiet. You spend more time alone, speak less, move differently, withdraw from unnecessary drama, lose interest in meaningless conversations, and detach from situations that once consumed you. But internally, something extraordinary is unfolding. You are rising above the world's noise. You are living from a higher state of consciousness. You are awakening. Most people live their lives trapped in a mental storm, constant overthinking, constant reacting, constant worrying, constant comparing, constant seeking validation, constant craving, constant fear, constant noise. Their minds never stop. Their emotions control them. Their attachments blind them. Their desires exhaust them. They are pulled by every little thing happening around them. They get angry quickly, triggered easily, insecure silently, and overwhelmed repeatedly. They live in a state of mental chaos because they have never experienced what it feels like to step outside of the world's noise. But solitude pulls you out of that storm. When you walk alone long enough, the noise of the world becomes less important, less influential, less loud. You start hearing your own mind more clearly, your own truth more loudly, your own intuition more strongly. You begin to realize that most of the things people fight over, stress about, complain about, chase after, or obsess over simply do not matter. Not in the bigger picture. Not on the level of the soul. Not when seen through the lens of inner awareness. At first, this shift feels strange because you are stepping out of a world you were once fully immersed in. You stop being bothered by things that once upset you. You stop reacting to things that once triggered you. You stop participating in problems that do not belong to you. You stop chasing attention. You stop defending yourself unnecessarily. You stop explaining your decisions. You stop engaging in drama. You stop absorbing other people's emotions. You become quiet, not because you are weak, but because you no longer need to waste energy on what does not serve your growth. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes free when it stops clinging to the world and starts observing it. This is what solitude teaches you, to become the observer instead of the reactor. You begin watching situations without getting pulled into them. You begin witnessing your emotions without drowning in them. You begin seeing people's behaviors without personalizing them. You start understanding life from a broader, more elevated perspective. You detach not because you don't care, but because you understand. As this transformation deepens, you start realizing how much of the world's noise is created by the ego. The ego wants to be right. The soul wants to be peaceful. The ego wants attention. The soul wants authenticity. The ego wants validation. The soul wants truth. The ego wants to win. The soul wants to understand. When you walk alone, the ego becomes quiet because it no longer has an audience to perform for. Without constant external stimulation, you begin to see how small the ego truly is, how many arguments, conflicts, and insecurities were the ego trying to prove something. You begin to rise above this. You stop needing to win arguments. You stop needing to prove yourself. You stop needing to defend every decision. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You stop needing the world to agree with you. This is the first sign that you are moving into a higher state of consciousness. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being at peace. Another profound change happens. Your emotional reactions weaken. Before solitude, you might have reacted instantly to everything: anger, frustration, excitement, fear, anxiety, insecurity. But solitude teaches patience. It teaches stillness. It teaches awareness. You begin to notice emotions as they rise and fall without labeling them as good or bad. You begin to understand that emotions are temporary states, not permanent truths. You stop identifying with every feeling. You stop being controlled by every thought. You begin to develop emotional neutrality, not coldness, but calmness. This calmness becomes your inner anchor. Even when things go wrong, you do not break as easily. You take a breath. You observe the moment. You understand what is happening. You respond with awareness instead of reacting with panic. Situations that once overwhelmed you no longer have the same power. People who once triggered you no longer hold the same influence. Problems that once felt heavy now feel lighter. You begin to realize that most challenges are only as stressful as your mind allows them to be. As you walk alone deeper into this higher consciousness, your intuition expands dramatically. You begin seeing things before they happen. You sense people's intentions more clearly. You understand which paths are aligned and which are not. You feel energies more strongly. You see patterns that your busy mind once ignored. This intuition is not magical, it is natural. It was always there, but the noise of the world was drowning it out. Solitude removes the noise, allowing your inner guidance to rise. With heightened awareness, you begin choosing your life more consciously. You select people based on energy, not appearance or convenience. You choose goals based on alignment, not pressure. You make decisions based on clarity, not impulse. You choose environments based on peace, not popularity. You begin building a life that reflects who you are becoming, not who you were taught to be. Another transformation appears. Your desires begin to change. You no longer crave the things you once thought you needed. You no longer chase after superficial validation, temporary affection, pointless conflict, unnecessary attachments, or lifestyles that do not match your soul. You begin to desire simplicity, truth, meaning, authenticity, purpose, and inner fulfillment. You begin to cherish deeper connections instead of wider social circles. You prefer quality over quantity. You prefer silence over noise. You prefer honesty over comfort. You prefer growth over stagnation. These shifts show that you are maturing spiritually. You also begin seeing people differently. Instead of labeling them as good or bad, right or wrong, you begin seeing their wounds, their fears, their conditioning, their pain, and their limitations. You understand that people react from their level of consciousness. You stop taking things personally because you realize that most people operate from fear, insecurity, and unhealed trauma. This awareness makes you compassionate, not naive. You stop being angry at others for their flaws. You stop expecting perfection. You understand. And understanding transforms your relationships. The more deeply you walk alone, the more you separate your identity from the external world. You realize that you are not your job, not your relationships, not your appearance, not your past, not your mistakes, not your achievements, not your failures, not your fears. You begin to understand that your true identity is something far deeper: your awareness, your presence, your consciousness. And once you understand this, acceptance becomes easier, forgiveness becomes easier, letting go becomes easier, healing becomes natural, growth becomes unstoppable. At this stage, solitude no longer feels like isolation. It feels like connection, connection to your true self, to your purpose, to the universe, to the present moment. You no longer feel alone, even when physically alone. You feel supported by your own soul. You feel guided by your intuition. You feel held by your inner strength. You feel grounded in your awareness. This is the sacred state where loneliness dies and peaceful solitude is born. When you reach this level of consciousness, you move through life differently. You walk slowly. You speak thoughtfully. You listen deeply. You love gently. You forgive quickly. You detach gracefully. You choose wisely. Your energy becomes calm, warm, and soothing. People feel safe around you. They sense your depth. They sense your clarity. They sense your presence. You become someone whose silence speaks louder than others' noise. And perhaps the most powerful transformation is this. Life stops happening to you and begins happening through you. You no longer see yourself as a victim of circumstances, but as a co-creator of your reality. You begin aligning with life rather than fighting it. You begin trusting timing instead of forcing outcomes. You begin seeing meaning in everything, every delay, every ending, every struggle, every blessing. You begin living with awareness rather than fear. This is why the strongest souls walk alone long enough to elevate their consciousness. They understand that solitude is not an escape, but an evolution. It is the path that leads you out of the world's illusion and into your inner truth. It is the journey that frees you from emotional chaos and brings you into spiritual clarity. It is the silence where awareness grows. It is the stillness where consciousness awakens. It is the solitude where your soul finally rises above everything that once held it down. Walking alone does not make you cold. It makes you wise. It does not make you distant. It makes you aware. It does not make you emotionless. It makes you emotionally intelligent. It does not make you disconnected. It connects you to your true nature. Once you reach this higher state, you live from clarity, not confusion, from peace, not panic, from wisdom, not fear. Nothing the world does can shake you anymore. Not rejection, not judgment, not loss, not disappointment, not uncertainty. You move through life like someone who sees what others cannot see. You rise above what others sink into. You remain calm where others break. You remain centered where others lose themselves. You remain awake where others remain trapped in illusion. This is the ultimate power of walking alone. It lifts you into a higher consciousness where you experience life with depth, presence, peace, and truth. And once you begin living from this elevated state, there is no going back. You taste a freedom, a clarity, a calmness, a wisdom that becomes your permanent inner foundation. Solitude becomes not just something you practice, but something you are. 15. The longer you walk alone, the more you realize that true freedom comes from within, not from anything the world can offer you. There comes a point in your journey through solitude where something shifts so profoundly inside you that it becomes impossible to return to the version of yourself that once relied on others, once clung to relationships, once feared loneliness, once sought validation, once needed constant reassurance, and once believed the world had the power to grant you freedom. As you continue walking alone day after day, moment after moment, breath after breath, you begin to awaken to a truth that many never discover in their lifetime. True freedom is internal. It cannot be given by anyone, taken by anyone, or influenced by anything outside of you. It is something you cultivate within your own consciousness. And once you find it, the world loses its power to imprison your mind. Most people go through their lives believing that freedom is external. They think freedom comes from having the right people, the right opportunities, the right circumstances, the right job, the right environment, the right partner, the right timing. They think freedom is what happens when life becomes easy, when problems disappear, when everything finally makes sense. But this belief is an illusion. because even with everything you want, you can still feel trapped internally, trapped by fear, by attachment, by insecurity, by expectation, by overthinking, by emotional dependence, by unhealed wounds, by anxious desires, by the need for approval, by the fear of loss, by the fear of being alone. This is why so many people appear free on the outside while suffering internally. They have the world, but not themselves. They have relationships, but not peace. They have comfort, but not courage. They have attention, but not self-respect. They have possessions, but not contentment. They have noise, but not direction. External freedom means nothing when internal chains still exist. But solitude breaks these chains slowly, silently, powerfully. When you walk alone long enough, you begin to feel your relationship with the world changing. You no longer cling to outcomes the way you once did. You no longer fear uncertainty the way you once did. You no longer depend on others emotionally the way you once did. You no longer build your identity based on how others see you. You no longer collapse when someone leaves. You no longer lose your center when life becomes difficult. Solitude teaches you that the person you were waiting for was always yourself. At first, this internal freedom grows quietly. You start noticing small moments where you choose your peace instead of your fear. Moments when you resist the urge to react impulsively. Moments when you avoid unnecessary arguments. Moments when you say no without guilt. Moments when you let someone go without begging them to stay. Moments when you accept what you cannot control instead of fighting it. Moments when you choose silence over drama. Moments when you choose yourself over approval. These small shifts accumulate, and before you realize it, you become a different person. Buddhism teaches that the mind is free when it stops attaching itself to impermanent things. When you walk alone, you begin to unattach naturally, not because you force yourself, but because solitude shows you the difference between what truly matters and what only distracts you. You begin to distinguish between peace and excitement, between love and attachment, between intuition and fear, between desire and need, between ego and soul. You begin to realize that the freedom you once chased outside was actually waiting inside you all along. The more deeply you enter solitude, the more you realize how little control the external world actually has over your emotional state. People can leave, but you don't shatter. Plans can fail, but you don't fall apart. Opportunities can disappear, but you don't lose hope. Circumstances can change, but you don't forget who you are. You stop expecting permanence from a world that is inherently temporary. You stop expecting stability from people who are still trying to understand themselves. You stop expecting life to be predictable, safe, or comfortable. You accept the nature of change, and in that acceptance, you find peace. The more time you spend alone, the more you realize that your mind was the true source of your suffering all along. You were not broken because of others. You were broken because you believed that others had the power to define you. You were not suffering because of loneliness. You were suffering because you feared being alone with your own thoughts. You were not hurting because people left. You were hurting because you attached your worth to their presence. You were not anxious because life was unstable. You were anxious because you were trying to control things that were never yours to control. Solitude reveals these truths not harshly, but gently. It shows you that suffering is born from illusion, and freedom is born from awareness. Once you begin understanding this, you feel something shift inside your chest, a strange sense of lightness, clarity, and spaciousness. You start breathing differently. You start thinking differently. You start responding differently. You start seeing differently. You begin realizing that nothing external can disturb your inner peace unless you allow it. You begin noticing that your triggers weaken, your emotional reactions soften, your overthinking quiets, your attachments loosen, your fears dissolve. You become someone who no longer breaks under pressure because solitude taught you how to carry yourself. One of the greatest revelations that arrives in solitude is that you are complete on your own, not in a forced, ego-driven way, but in the most gentle and powerful way possible. You understand that relationships can add to your life, but they cannot complete it. You understand that opportunities can support your path, but they cannot define it. You understand that love can enrich your heart, but it cannot fill your emptiness. You understand that people can walk beside you, but they cannot walk for you. You understand that your soul does not depend on anything outside of you to feel whole. This understanding is what transforms you from someone who fears being alone into someone who cherishes it. You begin seeing solitude as a gift, a sacred space where you meet yourself fully, honestly, deeply. You begin loving the person you are becoming, because solitude gives you the space to grow without interruption. You begin respecting yourself more, because solitude teaches you how much strength and wisdom you hold within. You begin trusting your intuition more, because solitude removes the noise that once drowned it out. You begin loving your own presence, because solitude transforms your inner world into a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. With this internal freedom comes another profound shift. You stop living reactively. People no longer provoke you easily. Circumstances no longer control your mood. External situations no longer dictate your emotional weather. You become someone who responds with intention instead of reacting out of fear. You make choices based on alignment rather than pressure. You move through life slowly, calmly, consciously, without rushing or forcing. Your energy becomes steady in a world full of restlessness. Another powerful change arises. You begin to attract differently. Because you are no longer driven by insecurity, you stop attracting situations rooted in insecurity. Because you are no longer emotionally dependent, you stop accepting relationships based on dependency. Because you are no longer desperate for validation, you stop drawing people who exploit that desperation. Because you are peaceful internally, you start attracting people who carry peace rather than chaos. Solitude raises your energy, and your life begins to reflect that raise. Over time, you build a life that feels like it belongs to you, not one shaped by fear, expectation, or emotional neediness. You create routines that nourish your soul. You make choices that feel aligned with your purpose. You surround yourself with people who respect your boundaries. You design a lifestyle that supports your growth. You feel connected to yourself more deeply than ever before. And in this connection, you find a level of inner satisfaction that no external achievement ever gave you. Eventually, you realize the ultimate truth. Freedom is not a place you go to. Freedom is a state you awaken inside yourself. Freedom is the ability to let go. Freedom is the ability to walk away. Freedom is the ability to start over. Freedom is the ability to feel pain without collapsing. Freedom is the ability to love without losing yourself. Freedom is the ability to be alone without suffering. Freedom is the ability to exist without needing permission. Freedom is the ability to choose your peace over your fears. Freedom is the ability to trust the universe instead of forcing outcomes. Freedom is the ability to live gently, calmly, consciously, and with presence. And solitude, the long walk inward, is what gives you this freedom. By the time you reach this point in your journey, you no longer recognize the person you used to be. The anxiety that once controlled you is gone. The insecurities that once consumed you have dissolved. The attachments that once trapped you have fallen away. The noise that once overwhelmed you has faded. The people who once drained you no longer access your energy. You have evolved into someone who sees life from a higher vantage point. Someone who moves through the world with wisdom rather than fear. Someone who trusts their own path more than anyone else's opinions. This is why the strongest souls walk alone, not to escape the world, but to discover the freedom that exists beyond it. Because once you find that freedom within yourself, you carry it wherever you go. No matter who comes, who leaves, what changes, or what stays, you remain centered. You remain peaceful. You remain whole. And that is the kind of strength that no one can take away. 16. When you walk alone long enough, you stop seeking the world and start seeking yourself. There is a moment on the path of solitude where something shifts so radically inside you that the very way you exist in the world changes. It does not happen instantly. It does not arrive with noise or drama. It comes slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. At first, you don't even notice it. You simply realize one day that the things you once chased hold no power over you anymore. The people who once influenced your mood no longer affect your peace. The validation you once desperately wanted no longer feels important. The noise you once drowned in now feels distant, almost irrelevant. This shift happens when you have walked alone long enough to detach from the illusions the world taught you. Illusions about success, about love, about happiness, about acceptance, about fulfillment, about worth. You begin to see that most people are not living their own lives. They are living lives shaped by expectation, comparison, fear, and unconscious patterns. They seek what others seek. They want what others want. They chase what others chase. Their desires are often inherited, not discovered. Their dreams often belong to someone else. Their goals are shaped by society, not their soul. Their identity is built from external pieces, not internal truth. But walking alone frees you from this imitation. In the beginning, solitude feels uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the emptiness beneath the noise. You feel the absence of people, of distractions, of approval. You feel the silence you once feared. You feel the inner restlessness you always ran from. You feel the emotional wounds you buried under busyness. You feel the truth you avoided through company. This discomfort is not a curse, it is an invitation to finally meet yourself. As solitude deepens, you begin to realize that the journey was never about escaping others. It was about finding yourself beneath everything that has been layered over your soul. You begin noticing how much of your identity was shaped by things outside of you. You see how your personality was influenced by the environment you grew up in. You see how your fears were created by past experiences. You see how your beliefs were formed by the people you listened to. You see how your goals were influenced by society's definitions of success. You see how your relationships were shaped by your unhealed wounds. When you walk alone, you begin unraveling these layers one by one. You begin asking yourself questions you never had the space to ask before. Who am I without the roles I play for others? Who am I when I am no longer performing for acceptance? Who am I when I am removed from everything familiar? Who am I when I'm not comparing myself to anyone? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I beneath my fears? Who am I beneath my wounds? Who am I beneath my conditioning? These questions lead you into a different kind of existence, an existence rooted in awareness instead of autopilot. You begin observing your mind instead of being controlled by it. You begin watching your emotional patterns instead of acting from them unconsciously. You begin hearing your intuition instead of silencing it. You begin feeling your soul instead of ignoring it. In this stillness, you discover something life-changing. What you were truly seeking all along was yourself. You were not seeking love. You were seeking connection to your own heart. You were not seeking validation. You were seeking acceptance from yourself. You were not seeking attention. You were seeking recognition of your own worth. You were not seeking success. You were seeking alignment with your purpose. You were not seeking peace. You were seeking understanding of your inner world. Buddhism teaches that the greatest suffering comes from ignorance of our true nature. When you walk alone, you begin dissolving this ignorance. You realize that nothing external can complete you, because you were never incomplete. Nothing external can define you, because your essence existed before the world told you who to be. Nothing external can give you worth, because your worth is intrinsic. Solitude reveals the truth that everything you were searching for in the world was always hidden within you. As you walk deeper into this realization, something remarkable happens. The world loses its grip on your spirit. You stop being emotionally swayed by temporary events. You stop being mentally enslaved by other people's opinions. You stop being spiritually drained by relationships that lack depth. You stop being pulled into dramas that don't belong to you. You stop being affected by noise that once drowned out your inner voice. You stop searching for meaning in places where meaning cannot be found. Instead, you begin listening inwardly. You begin feeling guided, not by external forces, but by an inner compass that becomes clearer each day. Your decisions no longer come from fear, they come from intuition. Your actions no longer come from insecurity, they come from wisdom. Your boundaries no longer come from anger, they come from self-respect. Your relationships no longer come from loneliness, they come from alignment. Your dreams no longer come from pressure, they come from purpose. As this transformation expands, you begin noticing that your energy has changed. You no longer need to beg for love because you carry love within. You no longer need to chase respect because you respect yourself. You no longer need to fight for space because you know you belong wherever your soul feels settled. You no longer need to prove your worth because you embody it silently. You no longer need to scream your value because your presence speaks for you. This inner transformation is not loud. It does not demand attention. It does not seek praise. It is subtle, steady, profound. And because it is subtle, many people around you will not understand it. They may even misinterpret your solitude as withdrawal, your silence as coldness, your boundaries as ego, your independence as arrogance. But this is simply because they have not walked the path you walked. They have not met themselves at the depth you have. They have not experienced a freedom that comes from within rather than from validation. When you walk alone long enough, you reach a state of mind where external chaos no longer disrupts your inner stillness. You begin living in a different frequency, a frequency of clarity, awareness, presence, and calm. You begin seeing the world from a different lens, a lens of understanding instead of judgment, a lens of compassion instead of reaction, a lens of acceptance instead of resistance. You begin experiencing emotions without drowning in them. You begin experiencing relationships without losing yourself in them. You begin experiencing challenges without collapsing under them. Your life becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about aligning with truth. Less about chasing desires and more about cultivating peace. Less about accumulating things and more about expanding consciousness. Less about being understood and more about understanding yourself. Less about holding on and more about letting go. Less about seeking the world and more about seeking yourself. And then comes the most powerful realization of all. You no longer fear losing anything external because you have found the one thing that cannot be lost: yourself. This realization marks the beginning of true freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to no longer be controlled by what once held you captive. Not the freedom to escape life, but the freedom to engage with life consciously. Not the freedom to isolate, but the freedom to choose connection without fear. Not the freedom from responsibility, but the freedom from emotional dependency. Not the freedom from uncertainty, but the freedom to walk through uncertainty with trust. At this stage, solitude no longer feels like a journey, it feels like home. Your inner world becomes your sanctuary. Your intuition becomes your guide. Your peace becomes your priority. Your consciousness becomes your strength. Your awareness becomes your freedom. This is why the strongest souls walk alone long enough to find themselves. They understand that the world can offer comfort, affection, distraction, company, pleasure, opportunity, and moments of joy, but it cannot offer identity, purpose, wisdom, clarity, or inner peace. These can only be discovered in the quiet, inward journey, in the space where the soul finally speaks, in the stillness where truth rises, in the solitude where illusions fall away. When you stop seeking the world and start seeking yourself, you begin living from a place of strength so unshakable that nothing external can break it. That is the final gift of solitude, a self that is whole, awake, grounded, fearless, and deeply free. 17. The final stage of walking alone. You become the source of your own peace, power, and purpose. There comes a moment in the long journey of solitude where everything finally connects: the silence you once feared, the loneliness that once hurt, the confusion that once clouded your mind, the emotional wounds that once felt unbearable, the people who left, the experiences that forced you to grow, the nights you spent questioning yourself, and the mornings you spent rebuilding your spirit piece by piece. All of it begins to make sense. You begin to understand why life isolated you, why certain doors closed, why certain relationships faded, why certain paths fell apart, and why you were pulled away from the noise of the world. Solitude was not punishment, it was preparation. It was shaping you into a person who no longer seeks peace outside because you have become the source of your own peace within. This is the final stage of walking alone, the stage where you realize that you are no longer the person who began this journey. The fear-driven version of you is gone. The insecure version of you is gone. The approval-seeking version of you is gone. The emotionally dependent version of you is gone. The reactive version of you is gone. The confused version of you is gone. What remains is someone who understands themselves so deeply that the world cannot shake their inner foundation anymore. In this stage, everything you once believed about life changes. You stop seeing peace as something you need to chase. You stop seeing happiness as something others must give you. You stop seeing clarity as something you must find outside. You stop seeing strength as something that comes from other people. You start realizing that the most powerful things in life are not given, they are cultivated. They grow from within, slowly, consistently, like roots pushing through soil. And solitude is the soil where these roots take hold. When you walk alone long enough, your perspective becomes radically different from the average person. You see things they cannot see. You understand things they cannot understand. You feel things they overlook. Most people live their lives disconnected from their inner world. They look for joy in achievements, attention, validation, status, relationships, or material things, all of which are temporary. But you begin to realize that anything external can only bring temporary satisfaction, not lasting peace. Lasting peace is built from within, through inner awareness, self-understanding, emotional clarity, and spiritual grounding. Buddhism teaches that the source of suffering is attachment, but the source of freedom is awakening. Solitude leads you through this awakening. You begin to detach not because you don't care, but because you finally understand the nature of all things. Everything changes, everything ends, everything shifts, everything flows. Nothing external can be fully controlled, preserved, or owned. And because you know this deeply, you stop trying to force life to be what it cannot be. You begin allowing life to move through you instead of fighting against it. At this level of understanding, you no longer resist change. You no longer cling to what is leaving. You no longer panic when plans fall apart. You no longer fear endings because you trust beginnings. You see life as a river, ever flowing, ever shifting, ever renewing. When something leaves your life, you understand that it is making space for something new. When something ends, you understand that it is redirecting you toward a deeper truth. When something feels uncertain, you understand that it is guiding you into a higher version of yourself. This trust transforms your entire existence. Another profound shift happens at this stage. You stop needing the world to reassure you. Before solitude, you may have looked for reassurance from friends, family, partners, society, or anyone who would tell you that you were enough. But once solitude teaches you who you truly are, you no longer need reassurance. You no longer need someone to validate your decisions. You no longer need someone to confirm your worth. You no longer need someone to approve of your path. Your confidence is no longer borrowed, it is built. It comes from the quiet certainty that you know yourself better than anyone else ever could. This inner certainty is one of the greatest gifts solitude gives you. It allows you to make decisions without hesitation. It allows you to move through life with calmness. It allows you to trust your intuition, even when others doubt you. It allows you to walk away from anything that threatens your peace. It allows you to protect your energy with unwavering boundaries. It allows you to honor your truth even when the world misunderstands you. It allows you to live authentically, deeply, and intentionally, not out of fear but out of awareness. When you reach this stage, the world's noise no longer has the power to disturb your inner calm. People's opinions no longer influence your sense of self. External chaos no longer disrupts your peace. You no longer react impulsively to situations. You no longer absorb the emotions of others. You become emotionally centered, mentally grounded, spiritually balanced. This balance makes you unshakable. Life can change in a moment, but your inner world remains steady because you have built it on awareness rather than attachment. At this point, your relationship with yourself becomes sacred. You begin treating yourself with gentleness, respect, and compassion. You stop punishing yourself for past mistakes. You stop criticizing yourself harshly. You stop comparing yourself to others. You stop abandoning yourself for the sake of keeping others comfortable. You start listening to your body. You start honoring your emotions. You start respecting your limitations. You start nurturing your spirit. You start living in a way that feels aligned with your values and beliefs. And because you have built this deep internal relationship, your external relationships improve as well. You no longer choose people based on loneliness, fear, or insecurity. You choose them based on alignment, respect, authenticity, and emotional clarity. You no longer tolerate manipulation, disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional immaturity. You no longer stay in relationships that drain your peace. You no longer allow others to cross your boundaries. You no longer attract chaos because your energy no longer resonates with it. You attract peace because you have become peace. You attract depth because you live with depth. You attract truth because you embody truth. Another profound realization emerges at this stage. You no longer fear being misunderstood. When you were insecure, being misunderstood felt painful. You wanted people to see your heart, your intentions, your truth. But now you understand that not everyone is capable of seeing beyond their own projection. Their misunderstanding is not a reflection of your character, it is a reflection of their consciousness. You stop explaining yourself to people who can only hear from their wounds. You save your truth for those who can understand it. And this saves you immense emotional energy. As you continue walking alone in this awakened state, you begin noticing your priorities changing. You no longer crave fast pleasure, you seek lasting fulfillment. You no longer desire attention, you value presence. You no longer chase busyness, you seek inner stillness. You no longer want crowds, you seek meaningful connection. You no longer thrive on noise, you flourish in silence. Your life becomes slower, simpler, deeper. You appreciate small moments. You value time. You choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, growth over comfort, truth over illusion. This inner transformation also changes your relationship with purpose. Before solitude, you may have searched for purpose in achievements, recognition, or external accomplishments. But solitude reveals that purpose is not something you find, it is something you remember. It emerges from within when your mind is quiet enough to hear it. Purpose is not loud, dramatic, or glamorous. It is quiet, steady, and deeply personal. It aligns with who you are, not who the world wants you to be. Once you begin living from this internal purpose, your life gains direction, meaning, and flow. Every action feels intentional, every step feels aligned, every choice feels guided. This stage of solitude gives you emotional independence, spiritual clarity, mental strength, and inner freedom, the kind of freedom that cannot be taken away by loss, rejection, change, or uncertainty. This is the freedom of someone who has mastered themselves. The freedom of someone who no longer collapses under emotional pressure. The freedom of someone whose mind is no longer a battlefield. The freedom of someone who moves through life with awareness instead of fear. At this point, you understand something that many never realize. You do not walk alone because you have no one. You walk alone because you have yourself. You walk alone because you know your path is sacred. You walk alone because you trust your inner wisdom. You walk alone because solitude elevates your consciousness. You walk alone because your soul grows in silence. You walk alone because you have awakened to the truth. And the truth is this: everything you were searching for, love, peace, wisdom, clarity, strength, direction, purpose, was always within you. Walking alone simply removed the noise so you could finally see it. This is the highest form of inner power. This is the deepest form of awakening. This is the final gift. Solitude gives you the realization that you were never walking alone in the first place. You were walking toward yourself. 18. When you walk alone, you enter the realm of inner stillness and discover a power the world cannot touch. There comes a stage in the long journey of solitude where silence no longer feels like silence. Instead, it becomes a living presence, a warm, expansive, almost sacred energy that surrounds you, protects you, guides you, and awakens something ancient inside your soul. At this stage, walking alone is no longer about escaping people, healing wounds, building boundaries, or finding strength. It becomes something much deeper. You begin entering the realm of inner stillness, a place where the noise of the world fades, the heavy weight of your past dissolves, your fears lose their voice, your doubts weaken, and your consciousness rises to a level you never imagined. This is the stage where solitude becomes not just a practice, but a spiritual dimension. Most people never reach this depth because they resist silence. They run from it. They drown it out. They fill their minds with distractions. They fear the stillness because they fear what they might hear the truth about their life, their attachments, their mistakes, their wounds, their desires, their patterns, or their unfulfilled potential. But when you walk alone long enough, you no longer fear stillness because you begin to taste its benefits. You begin to experience the kind of peace that cannot be found anywhere else. You begin to feel a quiet strength rising inside you, a strength that does not need noise, attention, or validation. As solitude deepens, your inner world becomes more alive than the outer world. You begin noticing things you once ignored. You begin sensing energies you once missed. You begin understanding people without needing explanation. You begin reading situations intuitively. You begin hearing your inner voice more clearly. You begin recognizing truth instantly. Your consciousness becomes sharp, precise, awake. You move from reacting to life unconsciously to observing life with clarity. This shift is the beginning of spiritual awakening. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not an achievement, it is the removal of illusion. When you walk alone, this removal happens naturally. First, you lose interest in superficial conversations. Then you lose interest in meaningless relationships. Then you lose interest in drama. Then you lose interest in proving yourself. Then you lose interest in external validation. Then you lose interest in being understood by everyone. And eventually, you lose interest in the ego's noise. Something else begins to take its place. a kind of deep, steady, unshakable presence. This stillness becomes your anchor. It becomes the space where your soul breathes. It becomes the ground beneath your feet when life becomes chaotic. It becomes your inner home, a place you can return to at any moment, in any situation. At this stage, you begin to realize that true strength does not come from how loudly you speak, how forcefully you act, or how powerfully you move through the world. It comes from how deeply rooted your inner stillness is. A person who is grounded in stillness cannot be manipulated, cannot be intimidated, cannot be thrown off balance, cannot be emotionally hijacked, and cannot be easily influenced. Their peace is not fragile, it is fortified from within. As you walk alone longer, stillness becomes your natural state. You stop reacting to everything that happens around you. You stop absorbing the emotional chaos of others. You stop getting pulled into unnecessary conflicts. You stop letting small things disturb your mind. You stop allowing external circumstances to dictate your emotional weather. You begin responding from clarity instead of reacting from fear. You begin speaking from awareness instead of insecurity. You begin choosing from wisdom instead of impulse. People around you will notice this change even if they cannot understand it. They will sense your calmness. They will sense your presence. They will sense your depth. They will sense a kind of silent strength that is rare in the world. They will see that your energy is no longer easily shaken. Some will feel intimidated. Some will feel inspired. Some will feel confused. But the truth is simple. You have entered a level of inner maturity that most never reach. One of the most powerful transformations that happens in this stage is emotional liberation. You begin releasing emotions without suppressing them. You begin understanding them instead of fighting them. You begin allowing them to move through you without attaching yourself to them. You no longer hold grudges. You no longer hold resentment. You no longer carry anger longer than necessary. You no longer cling to the past. You no longer fear heartbreak. Your emotions stop controlling you because you have learned how to sit with them in stillness until they lose their power. This emotional liberation gives you an incredible advantage in life. You stop leaking energy. You stop holding pain. You stop living with old wounds. You stop carrying burdens that never belong to you. You start feeling lighter, freer, more open, more grounded. Your mind becomes spacious. Your heart becomes soft. Your emotions become steady. Another profound change happens. You begin to see your life from a higher perspective. What once felt like a problem now feels like a lesson. What once felt like loss now feels like redirection. What once felt like chaos now feels like transformation. What once felt like punishment now feels like preparation. What once felt like betrayal now feels like protection. You begin seeing patterns in your life cycles that repeat, lessons that return, and truths that reveal themselves when you are ready. When you reach this level of awareness, you stop resisting life. You stop fighting circumstances. You stop forcing outcomes. You begin trusting the flow of life in a way you never did before. You see how every moment, even the painful ones, was shaping you into someone wiser, calmer, stronger, and more awakened. You begin living with a sense of surrender, not the hopeless surrender of giving up, but the wise surrender of trusting that life knows what it is doing. At this stage, your intuition becomes your guiding force. You can feel when something is wrong before it becomes obvious. You can sense when someone is not aligned with you. You can detect dishonesty instantly. You can sense when a situation is draining your energy. You can feel when a decision is right for your soul. You no longer need logical explanations for everything because your intuition speaks with a clarity that logic cannot match. You begin designing your life based on inner truth rather than external expectation. You choose peace over popularity. You choose alignment over approval. You choose truth over comfort. You choose stillness over noise. You choose depth over superficiality. You choose authenticity over performance. You choose growth over stagnation. Another profound shift occurs when you realize that solitude has made you self-sufficient in the fullest sense. Not isolated, not detached, not lonely, but self-sufficient, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You no longer enter relationships out of fear. You no longer tolerate disrespect out of desperation. You no longer chase people who do not value you. You no longer feel abandoned when someone leaves. You no longer fall apart when life changes. You no longer crumble under emotional pressure. You have become whole. This wholeness becomes your shield. It becomes your compass. It becomes your strength. It becomes your freedom. The world no longer pulls you the way it once did. You may interact with it, but you are no longer consumed by it. You may care for others, but you no longer lose yourself in them. You may work toward goals, but you no longer attach your identity to them. You may love people deeply, but you no longer fear losing them. You may enjoy life fully, but you no longer depend on it for happiness. This is the final evolution of solitude, the stage where you become the source of your peace, the source of your strength, the source of your clarity, the source of your stability, the source of your identity, the source of your purpose, the source of your healing, the source of your worth. At this stage, solitude is no longer something you practice. It becomes your internal nature. Even when surrounded by people, you remain centered. Even in chaos, you remain still. Even in conflict, you remain grounded. Even in uncertainty, you remain trusting. Your soul becomes like a mountain, unmoved, unshaken, unbothered. Your mind becomes like water, clear, reflective, adaptable. Your heart becomes like the sky, open, spacious, free. Your presence becomes like still fire, warm yet powerful, quiet yet impossible to ignore. And this is why the strongest souls always walk alone, because the journey inward is one only you can walk, and the power you find there is one only solitude can reveal. 19. Walking alone reveals the hidden truth. You are the one you've been waiting for all along. There is a point in the long journey of solitude where everything slows down. Your thoughts, your emotions, your desires, your fears, and for the first time in your life, you begin to see yourself clearly. Not the version of yourself that others shaped, not the version you performed to fit into society, not the version you created to gain acceptance or love, but the raw, unfiltered, honest, powerful version of you that has always been beneath the surface. This is the moment when walking alone reveals its deepest truth. The person you've been waiting for your entire life was never someone else. It was always you. Most people live in a continuous cycle of searching. They search for someone to understand them, someone to love them, someone to guide them, someone to heal them, someone to make them feel seen, someone to give them purpose, someone to help them carry their pain, someone to fix their loneliness. This search becomes exhausting because it is endless. The more they search externally, the more disconnected they become internally. They fill their lives with people, noise, entertainment, distractions, and responsibilities, hoping it will fill a void they do not understand. But the void is not external. It is simply the distance between who they truly are and who they have been forced to become. Walking alone ends this distance. At first, solitude feels uncomfortable because it pulls away everything you used as a distraction. You begin to see parts of yourself you hid from. You begin to feel emotions you numbed. You begin to recognize patterns you denied. You begin to question old beliefs. You begin to see how much of your life was shaped by fear, not truth. This stage is uncomfortable because your identity is unraveling, but this unraveling is necessary. It creates space for the real you to rise. As the silence deepens, something begins to shift inside you. You start feeling a connection to yourself that you never felt before. Not just a mental connection, but an emotional and spiritual one. You begin understanding your own needs without confusion. You begin recognizing your own emotions without fear. You begin honoring your boundaries without guilt. You begin respecting your inner voice more than the voices around you. You begin trusting your intuition even when it leads you away from familiar paths. Slowly, quietly, powerfully, you start becoming the person you once waited for. Buddhism teaches that true liberation comes not from changing the world, but from understanding your own mind. This is what solitude gives you: a doorway into your own consciousness. You begin seeing how much strength you already had, but never used. You begin recognizing how much wisdom was already inside you, but drowned out by noise. You begin realizing that every answer you once searched for externally was always hidden within you, waiting in the silence to be heard. As you walk alone, you begin discovering the parts of yourself you abandoned. You reconnect with your inner child, the version of you that once dreamed freely, felt deeply, laughed genuinely, and lived without fear. You reconnect with your inner protector, the version of you that kept fighting even when you didn't think you could. You reconnect with your inner healer, the version of you that survived heartbreak, betrayal, pain, and disappointment, and still kept going. You reconnect with your inner guide, the version of you that always knew what you needed, but you never listened to. These parts of you gather together inside your soul until you realize you were never truly alone. You simply forgot how to hear yourself. The longer you walk alone, the more you begin reclaiming your power. You stop giving others control over your emotions. You stop giving situations control over your peace. You stop giving your past control over your future. You stop giving fear control over your decisions. You stop giving loneliness control over your relationships. You stop giving insecurity control over your dreams. You start taking responsibility for your life in a way that feels empowering rather than overwhelming. This self-reclamation is one of the most profound stages of solitude. You begin remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt yourself. You begin reconnecting with your natural confidence, not the loud, performative confidence the world celebrates, but the quiet, steady confidence of someone who knows themselves deeply. You begin recognizing your worth without external validation. You begin embracing your uniqueness without needing acceptance. You begin honoring your path without comparing it to others. This is the stage where you become unshakable. You no longer collapse when someone leaves. You no longer fall apart when plans change. You no longer lose yourself in relationships. You no longer fear endings because you understand that you are capable of beginning again. You no longer beg for love because you know you deserve love. You no longer chase approval because you approve of yourself. You no longer fear loneliness because you have discovered the most powerful companion, your own soul. At this stage, something remarkable happens. Your relationship with life transforms. You begin living with intention instead of impulse. You begin choosing peace instead of drama. You begin choosing depth instead of distraction. You begin choosing clarity instead of confusion. You begin choosing authenticity instead of performance. You begin choosing alignment instead of fear. You begin choosing yourself without apology. The world around you will sense this transformation. Some will respect it. Some will be intimidated by it. Some will misunderstand it. Some will distance themselves because your growth threatens their comfort. But none of this affects you anymore, because the foundation of your identity no longer depends on external acceptance. The person you once waited for, the strong, wise, grounded, intuitive version of you, has finally awakened. A deeper spiritual shift also begins unfolding. You start understanding your life through a higher lens. You begin seeing patterns that once confused you. You begin realizing that certain people were not meant to stay, they were meant to teach. Certain experiences were not punishments, they were awakenings. Certain endings were not failures, they were redirections. Certain struggles were not obstacles, they were initiations. You begin trusting the timing of your life with a quiet confidence. You no longer rush, You no longer cling. You no longer chase. You move with flow instead of force. You understand that what is meant for you will not require you to lose yourself. You understand that what leaves was never part of your destiny. You understand that what stays is meant for your growth. This trust makes you emotionally invincible. When you reach this stage, even your silence becomes powerful. You no longer react to every situation. You no longer explain yourself unnecessarily. You no longer fight battles that drain your peace. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You choose your energy carefully. You protect your inner world fiercely. You move with calmness that others cannot disrupt. You walk with a presence that comes from deep awareness, and the most beautiful transformation of all. You begin enjoying your own company at a level you never knew possible. You find comfort in your solitude. You find inspiration in your silence. You find beauty in your stillness. You find fulfillment in your own existence. You find clarity in your inner world. You find peace in your own presence. This is the moment when you realize that the person you were searching for, the one who understands you, supports you, guides you, uplifts you, protects you, and walks with you, was always you. You were simply disconnected from yourself. Walking alone reconnected you to your own soul. At this level, solitude becomes your superpower, not because you reject the world, but because you no longer need the world to feel whole. Not because you fear relationships, but because you value your inner relationship more. Not because you are cold, but because you are conscious. Not because you hate people, but because you finally love yourself. This is why the strongest souls walk alone long enough to discover who they truly are. Because only in solitude do you finally meet the person you were always meant to become. Only in solitude do you finally awaken your deepest power. Only in solitude do you finally reclaim the life that always belonged to you. Only in solitude do you finally realize the truth. You are the one you've been waiting for all along. 20. The final transformation. When you walk alone long enough, you become untouchable not because you close your heart, but because you finally open it in the right direction. There comes a moment on the path of solitude where something irreversible happens, something that changes the architecture of your mind, the rhythm of your heart, and the weight of your soul. It is not loud. It does not arrive with fireworks or dramatic emotions. It comes quietly, like a sunrise slowly illuminating a dark landscape. This moment marks the final transformation. You become untouchable. Not in the sense that nothing can hurt you, and not in the sense that you become cold or detached from life, but in the sense that the world loses its ability to disturb your inner peace. You become someone who is grounded, centered, and whole in a way that no external force can shake or break. Before reaching this transformation, you walked through every stage alone, the stage of discomfort, the stage of self-reflection, the stage of inner conflict, the stage of healing, the stage of detachment, the stage of clarity, the stage of inner awakening. Most people stop somewhere in the middle because solitude tests you. It confronts you with your truth. It forces you to sit with your wounds. It challenges your illusions. It strips you of false identities. It exposes your fears. It removes the people you leaned on for emotional stability. It brings out the version of you that you hid from. Only those who walk deep enough into this silence reach the final stage. The stage where everything you learned, everything you survived, everything you released, everything you discovered, and everything you awakened becomes integrated into your being. This integration is what makes you untouchable. You begin to understand that inner peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of a stable, rooted awareness that exists beneath every experience. Life does not become easier, you become stronger. People do not become perfect, you become emotionally independent. Circumstances do not always go your way. You become adaptable. The world does not stop being chaotic. You stop letting the chaos break your internal balance. This is the difference solitude creates. Most people live with their emotional center outside of themselves. They place it in the hands of others. They depend on people's approval to feel worthy. They depend on relationships to feel whole. They depend on attention to feel valuable. They depend on success to feel confident. They depend on circumstances to feel peaceful. This creates fragility because anything you depend on can be taken away. Anything external can shift, break, leave, or change. When your inner world is built on external foundations, your peace becomes unstable. But when you walk alone long enough, you move your emotional center back where it belongs inside yourself. You stop depending on others to feel grounded. You stop depending on the world to feel secure. You stop depending on circumstances to feel calm. You stop depending on approval to feel confident. You stop depending on love to feel whole. You become your own anchor. This anchoring is what makes you untouchable. You reach a level of self-awareness where you see your emotions clearly without losing control. You reach a level of self-respect where you never allow mistreatment again. You reach a level of self-love where you no longer tolerate relationships that drain your soul. You reach a level of inner clarity where you know exactly who you are and what you need. You reach a level of intuition where you sense truth instantly. You reach a level of emotional maturity where you respond consciously rather than react impulsively. You reach a level of spiritual awareness where you trust life instead of fearing it. Buddhism teaches that suffering ends when attachment ends. Walking alone long enough teaches you to detach, not from love, not from people, not from life itself, but from the illusions that once controlled you. The illusion that you need others to be whole, the illusion that your worth depends on validation, the illusion that you must constantly prove yourself, the illusion that external things create internal fulfillment. Once these illusions dissolve, your whole experience of life changes. You begin moving through the world with an inner stillness that remains steady even in storms. People's behavior no longer decides your mood. Disappointment no longer fractures your spirit. Rejection no longer destroys your confidence. Loneliness no longer terrifies you. Uncertainty no longer triggers anxiety. Fear no longer dictates your choices. You become someone who can sit with discomfort without falling apart. Someone who can face challenges without collapsing emotionally. Someone who can hold space for pain without losing hope. Someone who can love deeply without losing themselves. Someone who can walk away when necessary without guilt. This is the essence of being untouchable. You do not harden, you awaken. Many people confuse untouchable with heartless. They think being untouchable means shutting your heart, becoming cold, isolating yourself emotionally, refusing to care. But the truth is the opposite. When you walk alone long enough, your heart softens not in weakness, but in wisdom. You care more, but you attach less. You love deeply, but you cling to no one. You show compassion, but you do not self-abandon. You forgive, but you do not forget your boundaries. You let people in, but only those who honor your peace. You release those who disturb your spirit without hatred. You become untouchable not because nothing can touch your heart, but because nothing can control it anymore. Your love becomes pure because it comes from fullness, not emptiness. Your relationships become healthier because you are no longer motivated by fear. Your decisions become wiser because they come from awareness, not insecurity. Your boundaries become stronger because they come from self-respect, not anger. Your presence becomes more powerful because your energy is no longer scattered or dependent. Another transformation happens at this stage. Your mind becomes crystal clear. You stop overthinking everything. You stop imagining worst-case scenarios. You stop replaying past wounds. You stop projecting your fears into the future. You stop creating mental stories that steal your peace. Solitude teaches you how to observe your thoughts without becoming trapped in them. You begin noticing the space between thoughts, the stillness where clarity lives. This mental clarity allows you to make decisions without confusion, to see situations without distortion, and to understand people without emotional bias. And then something beautiful happens. Your life begins aligning with your true self. Because you no longer seek validation, you stop pretending. Because you no longer fear judgment, you start living honestly. Because you no longer depend on others, you start following your path. Because you no longer suppress your emotions, you start healing deeply. Because you no longer chase love, you start attracting healthy connections. Because you no longer fear endings, you start embracing beginnings. Because you no longer cling to your past, you start creating your future. Everything begins to flow. This is the final transformation. Solitude gives you not a change in your circumstances, but a change in your consciousness. You become untouchable because your peace is self-generated, your worth is self-defined, your love is self-sustaining, your clarity is self-rooted, your strength is self-built, your purpose is self-guided, your identity is self-owned. And once you reach this stage, nothing external can break you again. People can misunderstand you, but you remain centered. People can leave you, but you remain whole. Life can shift, but you remain grounded. Storms can come, but you remain steady. Pain can touch you, but it cannot control you. Because the person you have become is no longer shaped by the world. You are shaped by your own awakened consciousness. This is why the strongest souls walk alone long enough to reach this final stage. Not because they reject people, but because solitude taught them how to return to themselves. Not because they don't feel pain, but because they no longer collapse under it. Not because they avoid love, but because they finally know how to love without losing themselves. Not because they're isolated, but because they're internally whole. This is the highest form of strength, a strength that lives in the silence of your soul, a strength that cannot be shaken by the noise of the world, a strength that turns solitude into a sanctuary and consciousness into a shield. This is what it means to become untouchable. There comes a moment at the end of every great spiritual journey when the traveler finally looks back at the path they walked, the storms they survived, the mountains they climbed, the pains they endured, the lessons they learned, and realizes that nothing was random, nothing was wasted, nothing was meaningless. Everything was part of a sacred unfolding. Every quiet night, every silent tear, every difficult goodbye, every lonely morning, every overwhelming confusion, every painful chapter, every internal struggle, they were not signs of abandonment. They were signs of transformation. They were shaping you, strengthening you, purifying you, and preparing you for a life built on truth rather than illusion. This is the final realization you reach after walking alone through all the lessons. You were never walking away from the world. You were walking toward yourself, coming home to yourself, returning to the person you were always meant to be before life's noise covered your inner voice, before the world's expectations buried your truth, before fear shaped your identity, before pain built your walls, before loneliness clouded your judgment, before attachment made you forget your own strength. Walking alone was never about isolation. It was about revelation. It was the universe removing what you thought you needed so you could discover what you actually needed. Removing the wrong people so the right connections could enter your life. Removing the noise so you could hear your intuition. Removing distractions so you could see your purpose. Removing illusions so you could awaken to reality. Removing external crutches so you could stand on your own soul. Everything solitude took away from you was something that was keeping you away from yourself. As you progressed through each lesson, you didn't just learn, you evolved. Your consciousness expanded, your emotional intelligence grew, your self-awareness sharpened, your intuition strengthened, your energy became cleaner, your peace became deeper, your boundaries became stronger, Your presence became lighter and more powerful at the same time. The version of you who once feared being alone dissolved. The version of you who doubted themselves disappeared. The version of you who sought validation vanished. The version of you who clung to people out of insecurity faded. In their place, a wiser, calmer, more grounded, more aware, more awakened version of you emerged, a version that lives from truth, not fear, from clarity, not confusion, from strength, not desperation, from love, not attachment. This transformation is the real gift of walking alone. As you walked deeper into solitude, you learned how to release everything that was never meant to stay: the emotional expectations, the unhealthy attachments, the old identities, the past wounds, the inner noise. You learned to sit with yourself long enough to meet the parts of you that were denied, silenced, or neglected. You learned to listen inwardly instead of chasing answers outwardly. You learned to discern between what drains your soul and what feeds it. You learned to recognize the difference between the desires of the ego and the desires of your spirit. You learned to trust your own wisdom more than the opinions of the world. And slowly, you began to realize that walking alone was not a punishment or a burden. It was an awakening. Because of solitude, you grew into someone who no longer collapses when life becomes difficult, someone who no longer fears uncertainty, someone who no longer breaks when people leave, someone who no longer allows others to decide their worth, someone who no longer gets lost in emotional storms, someone who can sit with pain without letting it define them, someone who can feel deeply without drowning, someone who can walk away without guilt, someone who can love without losing themselves, someone who can exist without constantly needing external reassurance. Walking alone taught you how to be whole, and because of that wholeness, life begins to change in ways you could never predict. When you become internally aligned, your external world begins aligning with you. When you become peaceful within, your relationships become peaceful. When you become clear within, your decisions become wise. When you become grounded within, your path becomes steady. When you become awakened within, your purpose reveals itself. When you become self-sufficient within, you stop depending on the world for emotional survival. This is why the final stage of walking alone feels different from all the others. It is no longer about healing wounds, creating boundaries, or protecting your energy. It becomes about expanding your consciousness, embodying your truth, and living from your highest self. You begin to realize that solitude is not something you return to in moments of pain. It becomes your natural state of awareness. Even when you are surrounded by people, you remain inwardly centered. Even when life becomes chaotic, you remain inwardly still. Even when situations change suddenly, you remain inwardly steady. Even when the world becomes loud, you remain inwardly quiet. Solitude stops being a place you go to and becomes the person you are. You carry your inner sanctuary wherever you go. This is the final transformation. Not that you walk alone, but that you walk with yourself. You walk with your intuition. You walk with your peace. You walk with your wisdom. You walk with your truth. You walk with your healing. You walk with your purpose. You walk with your higher consciousness. You walk with a soul that has finally awakened. And here is the deepest secret. When you return home to yourself, you stop seeking from the world what was already inside you. You stop seeking love because you have become love. You stop seeking peace because you live in peace. You stop seeking validation because you validate yourself. You stop seeking answers because you are connected to your inner guidance. You stop seeking strength because you embody strength. You stop seeking happiness because your happiness comes from within. You stop seeking direction because your path rises to meet your awareness. Solitude becomes the lens through which you see the world clearly for the first time. You begin recognizing which connections are genuine and which are born from fear. You begin seeing which situations align with your soul and which are distractions. You begin understanding which choices elevate you and which diminish you. You begin feeling which environments expand your consciousness and which suffocate your spirit. You become someone who cannot be fooled easily, someone who cannot be manipulated, someone who cannot be emotionally controlled, someone who cannot be intimidated, someone who cannot be broken. Because life no longer defines you, you define your life. This is why the strongest souls always walk alone long enough to discover themselves. They understand that solitude is not the absence of people, it is the presence of truth. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of awareness. Not the absence of love, but the presence of self-love. Not the absence of connection, but the presence of authenticity. And when you find yourself truly, deeply, completely, you realize something extraordinary. You were never walking alone at all. Your soul was walking with you the entire time. And now, you finally hear it. Now, you finally trust it. Now, you finally live as the person you were always meant to be. This is the ultimate destination of walking alone. Not isolation, not loneliness, but liberation. You are free now. Free within, free without, free in your mind, free in your heart, free in your soul. You have finally returned home,